morning. I hope you can hear me at the back. We have tested it, but clearly not enough. So a quick bunch of housekeeping before we start the day. We do not have any fire alarms scheduled for today, so if the fire alarm does go off, it is definitely the real thing. So please follow Elexon or MHHS folk out, and we'll lead you to safety. If any of you can't use the stairs, please stay at your seats, and a fire warden will reach out to you. The toilets are located right at the entrance. Right, so welcome again, and it's an absolute pleasure seeing all of you, 150 of you, both online and in person, here for the second MHHS Open Day. We can't tell you how chuffed and how excited we are. And while we're at that, we also wanted to extend a special thanks to all of you who've been participating, working alongside our various teams, design, testing, code drafting, migration. There's so much happening, and I know there's so much engagement from the industry, particularly at a time where things aren't the easiest given the market conditions. It's not been an easy ride for any of us. So we really, really appreciate it. Thank you. The other thing we did want to talk about is you will hear throughout the session today is about how do we get this program delivered as quickly and as efficiently and as seamlessly as possible for all of you, and most importantly for end consumers. So a lot of the threads today is going to be focused on quicker delivery and your help really in how do we make this happen. So I'm going to walk through the agenda. We've got, we had Angela Love, our director for future engagements and future markets and engagements, slotted in for the welcome address. Angela's running a little bit late, so Chris Welby, our SRO, is going to be filling in for her. We then will have the Ofgem address from Rachel Clark, our sponsor, who will talk to us about the Ofgem perspective. We then will start talking about the replan. Now, we know all of you, a lot of you are really, really deeply involved in the replan activity. And Keith Clark and Kate Goodman's going to be talking all about everything we've done so far, everything we're slotted to do in the next few months, and how we can all work together to work towards a more faster or a quicker go live if feasible. We then break for coffee, a quick 15 minutes break. We bring you back to a quick participant engagement session where we'll try and get to know you a little bit better. And going straight from there is to our participant readiness, participant presentations and panel, where we've got DCC and Elexon and also Ofgem talking to us all about lessons learned and everything they're doing from a delivery perspective. Lunch is at 1. The afternoon is all about testing. Kate Goodman and Dominic Mooney is going to be talking about our approach to testing. And Martin Crozier and Sajwal Das from the IPA are going to be talking about how they would assure all the industry test phases. And that will bring us to the close of all the sessions slotted in for today. And that will also be the point where we bid goodbye to our online attendees. However, we've got a bunch of stores open for you, where we talk about all the different key topic areas that we hopefully would have addressed all your concerns with. And then finally, we've got drinks at 5 o'clock at the Union, so please do join us. It'll be lovely to get to know you a little bit better. All questions through the day is via Slido. If you are asking questions in person in the room, please wait for the mic to get to you because the acoustics could be a little bit odd. So with that, I hand over to Chris Welby.
Okay, thank you. Welcome all to Elexon's offices. While we've run most of this programme virtually, it's always nice to see people in the room and meet people face to face and realise that somebody you thought was 4'6" is actually 6'10". But this is an important programme for the industry, and I know these are challenging times, but as I think I said at the previous opening day, if this programme had already been delivered, we'd have been able to offer customers the advantage of time of use to move their electricity use to a cheap time of day. So I think it's very important we don't forget that in these challenging times, that part of this is the solution. Because in my view, I don't think that these high prices are going to go away anytime soon. But before we start, I just want to talk about we've done a year on this programme, and I want to cover what we've actually covered so far. So we have got the central programme fully mobilised. So it's taken a lot of doing, but we've got it set up and running. We've appointed the lead delivery party in Explo, who have been brought in their expertise to help us run this programme, and they hit the ground running, and they've got this up and running. We've also got the governance framework in place. This is very important because you have to remember this is your project as an industry. It's not ours. We are merely facilitating this programme for the industry. And the governance structure that we put in place is to allow you as the industry to guide us as a programme as how we need to move and what we need to do. So we've got the programme steering group at the top, which oversees the programme and ensures it delivers. And then we've got obviously the design group, which has been doing sterling work, delivering the design, the detailed design. We've got the TMAG, Testing and Migration Advisory Group, which is obviously preparing for the testing, which will be an important phase. And we've got the CCAG, which is looking to do complementary code changes as required. We've also got the comms at the moment. So I hope most of you signed up to our newsletter, which comes out on every Wednesday. We also now do a special design newsletter. But we've also got the website up and running, and we've now got the collaboration base there. So all the documentation that you need as parties to understand what you need to do should be there and available to you in an easy, accessible format. I'm going to pause on that and say we're still a work in progress. So if you do have any feedback on that collaboration base, then please do send it in, because it is important to us that it delivers for you. It's not for us and what we want, it's what you want of that collaboration base, that collaboration base that we require. After a long hard slog, we've got the detailed design out for the final consultation. Please, it's been a lot of work, and thank you to everybody who's contributed to it. It's been hard work, but it's so important to get the design right, because in the end of the day, if the design is right at the start, then they'll help us deliver on time. But, like I said, the consultation are due in by the 13th of September, so if you could, and you are responding, please, can I ask you, don't wait till the 13th of September to send in your submission. We're happy to get them in the drip feed, but as soon as you get them in, the sooner we can start working on your comments and dealing with them. We've also done the initial consultation on the programme replan. We always said after the design is delivered that we do a replan. That is now, we've done the first consultation on that. We've had your feedback. We'll be doing the second consultation very shortly. But in your response to the second consultation, can I emphasise the importance of evidence? Opinions are great, but we need the evidence to sort of why you think the plan is or is not suitable. It's very important. We can't make decisions on opinion. We need the evidence to back them up, because I, as SRO, have to convince Rachel, the sponsor, that the evidence is there to make the changes, any changes we plan to make to the pre-plan. So that's how far we've got so far, and I think over a year that is actually quite a lot to have achieved. Coming up, we've got to deliver the core design. We've got to get it baseline. So once we've got it baseline, following your comments, then that is the design we are delivering to. And that means any changes subsequently have to go through the change control process. And the bar that we set is the design should only really be changed if it's proved that something doesn't work. We've also got to get the plan re-baseline. This is very important, because this is how you know what you need to plan. So the key thing for us, you need the design to know what you need to do, and you need a plan to know when you need to do it by. So those are the two key elements for programme participants. And therefore, it's all, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, and I'm sure my team will continue to say it, your engagement in that is so important. We're also engaging in the data procurement, which will be the data integration platform, which is how we will collect and send our value data. The procurement is complete. We've got best and final offers, and we're hoping to award that contract in November. And finally, all programmes should be parties mobilised. So ready for that. And when I say mobilised, let's be clear, this is when you start your design, build and test. So For some of you are already on that programme, you've already started and you're making good progress. Some of you still need to do that impact assessment. It's going to impact an awful lot of your business. I think I can't emphasise that if you say, oh, it's just impacting our settling processes, then sorry, it's going to impact everything, every system we know apart from your HR system. But if I find a reason why it impacts your HR system, I will let you know. So that is your welcome from me and from the programme, because you did a team effort. So I'd like now to hand back to Smitha, and I hope you have an enjoyable day and you find it informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was really helpful and really useful. We've now got Rachel Clark from Ofgem talking to us about Ofgem's perspective on the programme.
Thanks, Smitha. Good morning. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Rachel Clark. I'm a Deputy Director at Ofgem with responsibility for retail systems and processes, which in practice means the switching programme, which you will hopefully all know has recently gone live and we're hoping to close down by the end of October, and all of our work on smart metering, as well as obviously being programme sponsor for market-wide half-hour settlement, which is obviously why I'm here today. So it's absolutely lovely to be here and lovely to see so many people engaged in the delivery of market-wide half-hour settlement. I'm going to talk about two things today. One is about the importance and the urgency of delivering this programme, messages which you've heard already to some extent this morning, you've heard already before from me, and you will hear again continually, and we go on about it because it is so important. The other thing I will do when I've banged on about that for a while is talk a bit about MP 162 and our recent decisions, for want of a better word, on 162 and why we've taken those, because I think that's very topical and might be of interest. So just going back to the importance of what it is we're doing here, you are all incredibly well aware of the need to move to a more efficient energy system and to deliver net zero. And market-wide half-hour settlement is absolutely at the heart of what we need to do to enable this country to do that. And whilst I absolutely recognise that we are going through some really extraordinary times in terms of energy markets at the moment, the sad fact is those problems make delivering market-wide half-hour settlement more, not less urgent, and more important, and they place more emphasis on us getting it done well, and getting it done as quickly as we can. And it isn't just me saying that, it's what I'm hearing from Jonathan Broley, it's what I'm hearing from Bays. We obviously have a new government coming in, but I don't expect that to change as we get new ministers, because the fact of the matter is we need to do everything we can to make our energy system more efficient, and market-wide half-hour settlement is a very important central part of that, and a lot of other things wait for it and hang off it. So I do want to talk about timing. I know the programme is obviously going through a replan at the moment. I want to urge all of you to engage in that replan as creatively and enthusiastically as you can. The way this programme is set up, as programme sponsor, Ofgem will have to approve any changes to the plan that move a level 1 milestone by 3 months or more. Now, I'm not really a betting woman, but my money would be on that replan moving at least one level 1 milestone by 3 months or more, which means that plan will come to us for approval. So it's worth saying a bit about what we will look for in reaching our decision on whether we can approve it or not. And Chris has already touched on this. What we will need for decisions is evidence that the plan in front of us is the fastest possible, robust, achievable plan that you could all come up with. And we will need to see evidence that every timeline and every approach has been scrutinised and challenged with a view to finding the most efficient, fast way of doing it, whilst not putting unacceptable risks on programme delivery. So I do know that a pressure to go faster, faster, faster is an invitation to programme risk. We are not asking for a risky programme. We are asking for the fastest possible, efficient, robust, deliverable programme that you can come up with collectively. And when we set out to put obligations on the industry to deliver this programme, we have included in that, as you will all know, an obligation through the BSC or through other codes on all parties to operate in accordance with the baseline plan. And when we did that in the knowledge that what we were asking you to do was not just cooperate with the plan, but to devote the resources and priority internally in your organisations that you need to in order to deliver with that plan. And it's that focus and that commitment that we really want to see brought to the replan, so that when the programme comes to me with a plan that will undoubtedly move at least one level 1 milestone by 3 months, I would guess, I can be convinced that it is the fastest plan possible, that every avenue has been looked at, that all the risks have been understood. And then if I have to go and talk to the likes of Jonathan and ministers about the unacceptable consequences of that, I can at least explain why it is the fastest achievable, robust plan we've got. So it cannot stress too much the need for evidence, the need for people to think and to challenge yourselves, challenge the programme, challenge others on why those timelines are what they are and whether there is anything that can be done to make them faster. I think I probably have banged on about that for long enough now, and I will stop, but I'll come back to it another time. On MP162, so I would guess most of you probably know what it is, but just in case you don't. So that's the set modification that will introduce a new user role to the DCC. I think it's meter data retrieval that enables supply agents to play a role in market-wide half-hour settlement. It has proved to be very controversial and difficult, and it was sent to Ofgem by the SET panel with a unanimous recommendation to reject a modification. That obviously causes a programme problem because the delivery of that role is on the programme critical path, and making a decision on it and getting work started on it very quickly is on the programme critical path. So I will just update you on a couple of things that Ofgem's done in the last week, which you may or may not have caught up with. So on the first, what we felt looking at the analysis that came to us on MP162 was that it felt like two issues had been somewhat conflated. On one hand, there's technical delivery of the role, the systems and process changes that need to be made to enable those MDRs to play their role. And on the other hand, the capacity issues caused as a result not just of the creation of the MDR role, but critically of the introduction of market-wide half-hour settlement. And although those are not identical, they are very closely linked, and there's certainly far more of a capacity issue around the introduction of MHHS than there is around the introduction of the MDR role itself. So we sought to separate those issues, and we have, as of yesterday, sent the modification back to the SET panel asking for that separation to be made, so that the modification, the legal proposal on the table, we think is self-standing as an introduction of the MDR role and should be brought back to us as a self-standing technical implementation. We're not asking for legal changes to the text. We're asking for an analysis that looks at what the text is actually doing and not at all the capacity issues. We have at the same time directed DCC to go away and come back to us with an options analysis on the capacity and scheduling issues that have given rise to so much tension and concern. So I recognise that isn't fixing any of the problems. I do hope that it will enable us to keep the programme on track in terms of the key technical critical path work. We at Ofgem are absolutely committing as programme sponsor to make sure that all parties involved, so DCC, MHHSP and SECAS, if we need to go back through the SEC on this, work together to make sure that we get an acceptable and sensible workable outcome on those capacity and scheduling issues. Those were the substantive things I was going to say. Apart from that, just conclude by saying I'm really excited to be working on this phenomenally important programme. I know I went on a bit about the importance at the beginning, but that's because it's true. And I think it's wonderful to be involved in something that has the power to make so much difference. And I look forward to working with all of you in delivering it. Thank you. Want to do questions? Or? Yes. Obviously,
we don't have any questions yet, so. So anybody who wants to raise some questions either could go into slido.com with hashtag MHHS, or given that we've not had any, if anybody wants to, we'll come to you with the mic. Yeah.
So they would agree with that.
In which case, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. And to be fair, Rachel, everything that you've just said is exactly what the focus of the next presentation is all about, barring the MP162 bit. Everything around planning and how are we trying to get the most efficient and the most robust plan possible for this programme. And I'll hand over to Keith Clark and Kate Goodman. And just a reminder, Slido on MHHS, on hashtag MHHS, please.
Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Keith Clark, Programme Manager for MHHS and the partner lead. I'm joined by my colleague Kate Goodman, who's the SI's test strategist and test architect. I feel like I've been well and truly warmed up on the subject of replan by both Chris and Rachel, which is great. It's good to be very clear about the mandates for this exercise. The plan itself We're going to be talking about the exercise itself and how we're running it and how we continue to plan to run it. And during the day, we'd be keen to get your views, both in the session but also on the side. There's a stall there out in the meeting room, and we'd like to have some kind of good bilateral conversation with you on how you think the process is going and what I said about how we're going to conclude it. But just to make it very clear, the programme continues to work to the existing timeline. And that's really important to note. All decisions in the programme at the moment are referenced to the timeline and made based on impacts to that timetable. And that will continue to be the case until and unless we come up with a different plan. It is the baseline schedule. You've heard from Jim about the importance of this plan, and it is a serious business to get this plan right. And we want to make sure that we get it done expeditiously, but also getting the quality of the plan right, so that everybody is involved in this exercise can believe in the plan and see it as realistic and deliverable. So we can't be overly rushed in the process, as we'll be living with any new plan for some considerable point of time. Since the timetable was set, there have been quite a lot of changes. It's been some time since that timetable was set. There have been changes to dates, and there's also been improvements in the information that we have about some of the topics involved in delivering the programme. So there are changes naturally as the plan develops, and as we learn more and deliver more, plans will change and plans are only the basis for the next change. So it's a natural process that at this point, having a timetable and looking to revalidate it is a good and healthy thing to do in terms of programme delivery. So there are, as we get under the skin of the timetable as it stands, areas which are less clear than they probably could be or should be at this stage. And some of the subjects which are less clear are quite complex and time-consuming to resolve. So we are asking for patience to go through this process, that not everything is clear, but we're trying to illustrate the plan as we go through and provide better illustrations as we go through the process. And we're working with you to make sure that we have consensus and we all get on the same page in relation to the way we deliver this programme. So we need to clarify some of these uncertainties more. We know what they were. We laid them out in round one of the consultation. They will still be uncertainties, but with more information in round two, and it will be a natural progress of progressing the conversation and reaching the point in the plan that we're comfortable with. So, as I say, it's normal to have uncertainties. We won't, at the end of the process, have a plan where all the questions are answered. There will still be questions, and we'll be managing them as risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies. That's the normal way of delivering the programme. Not everything will be clear at that point. We will come to a point in the process where we need to decide whether the advantages of baselining a new plan outweigh the concerns about the remaining uncertainties. So it's a judgment call at some point where we need everybody on the same page in terms of the delivery and how we're going to do it, but accepting of a certain level of uncertainty. It's getting that balance right, and it's obviously a judgment call Ofgem ultimately will have to make when we ask them to approve any plan, about the benefit of baselining the plan and all the benefits of getting on the same page outweigh any uncertainties that still exist in the plan at that point. So our job is collectively with you. We always said we'll do it with you. We've been very happy that we've had a lot of planning volunteers working with us, people that are prepared to put time into this and recognise the importance of the exercise. So we're doing it collectively with you, trying to build a plan that everybody can understand and buy into as we go through this, and make it a plan, not just a timetable, but a timetable with all of the thinking and approaches, the risks outlined, the assumptions clear, the dependencies clear. And this is much more than just a schedule or a timetable. This will be a delivery plan in the greatest sense, and one that all of you, especially the project and programme managers here, would expect to see in any professionally run programme. So, Rachel mentioned it will need Ofgem's approval points. So I won't harp on too much because I think the point has been made very clear already. But I'm clear the mandate is that we have a timetable. Any changes to that timetable will need to be clarified, justified, and backed up by information. And this is one of the things we'll talk about when we speak about round two of the process. It is the time to give the information to justify any change. And whilst we recognise there's a high likelihood, even Rachel said that there's a likelihood that some dates may move, we've got to prove it. We've got to understand why what the risks that we're managing by moving those dates and getting something that everybody believes is realistic. We can't do it without you. We want an honest and open debate continually with you. We have a mandate and we need to deliver this programme expeditiously. As the programme manager, I want a baseline plan, because it's very difficult to manage a programme without a baseline plan that every party that I'm dealing with understands and buys into. So we've been managing this programme without a design baseline and without a fully validated timeline. That creates an environment of ambiguity, and it means that a lot of stakeholders have differing expectations and understanding about how to deliver this programme. By creating both a design baseline and a planning baseline that you've all been involved in, we have the basis to be on the same page and to collaborate effectively to deliver this programme together. And that's the whole reason why there's such a push to get the plan done, but we don't want to get the plan done faster than the quality of that plan suggests is legitimate. So I can't emphasise enough again, it's a serious exercise, the replan. I think you've probably got that message already. We need to get it right. And I just want to go through some of the slides in this presentation to back some of that up. So if I can move to the next.
Got a clicker there.
Is there a clicker? No one told me to use it.
Point it. It's that clicker. You point it over here, kids. Point it this way. Point it this way.
Oh, you're over there, are you? It's not working. There we go. Right. I think probably I'll cover most of the message on this one. We're currently producing, developing, and iterating a round 2 consultation, plan for consultation on the back of the things. I don't think I'm going to say much more about this. I'd rather just look at the next slide. Right. So what I would like to say about this, we've had the process already of volunteers being involved with us to lots of rough edges off around one plan. What I would say about round 1 and round 2 is that they are vehicles for a dialogue. They're illustrations, they provide context. So in round 1, thank you. So the round 1 plan was very much a structural plan to look at some of the approaches, the assumptions, and the ways we might sequence the activities through delivery. And it was the first time that many of you had the time to get involved, and even during round 1, some of your organisations have still been otherwise engaged on other programmes. So it was an opportunity to do a very high level structural engagement with you on how the plan might look, and round 1 plan was for that benefit. The round 2 plan that we intend to issue on Monday will be further information thinking. We intend that it has dates in it, but these dates they're illustrations. They're not dates that have been agreed with anybody, it's certainly not agreed by Ofgem. They are again context for the sequencing and the thinking we have about the approaches. So we intend to give you a more developed view on some of the uncertainties. The dates in the plan are to help illustrate the sequencing and the way these things might plan out. But they're not, the round 2 plan is not a draft concluding plan. It is just another vehicle for conversation. And the objective is still to either meet the Ofgem timetable or provide the evidence why there might be a gap between that and any plan we come up with. So I don't want the round 2 plan to be seen as, if you like, a draft conclusion of the process. It's far from that at the moment. We have nowhere near enough backup, either from you or from ourselves at this point, to justify any dates in the plan at this point. That's why round 2 is so important. So the dates are not the actual dates, but they're illustrations and context. And the round 2 challenge is, as already been said, to provide information about what the actual dates might look like, based on evidence to back up any changes and gaps from the timetable to any plan that we come up with. If we move on to the next one. Okay, so you've seen this slide before, but basically the artifacts that will constitute the plan. I would point that to the plans on the page and the RAID will still be producing that as one document because the two are quite interrelated. The programme plan and schedule, so the Microsoft project plan that we will present to you is a more developed schedule. As I say, it's not the full plan, but it's the schedule. I think there's some dates in it, and the other key one will be milestone register. The other are really just context documents at this stage, and ones which are generally available ready to you. And provide the full set. So the focus for the consultation will be the plans on page is the RAID items, because a schedule is no good without more than RAID thinking. You need clarity on the risks, issues, assumptions, and dependencies that underpin the schedule, otherwise it's not a plan. So those things are really important to have the dialogue on. And last measure which just collects things together. This was the plan on page we used in round one. It was by way of illustration. It was just a way of setting some context on our thinking around approach and sequencing and critical path, but it's very much a one-size-fits-all. We said in the original open day, that we want to move at the speed the fastest. We want to expedite the delivery. We want to get to the end as soon as possible. I know some of you want that as well. So this one-size-fits-all will not be what we're going into round two with, because we've always said that we try to find ways to have mechanisms to accommodate parties who want to go faster, who can go faster, who are going faster. The plan has to be able to accommodate those parties. So we're absolutely going to be true to the objective, which is to get to the end as fast as possible with those parties who are able to get there, that allows us to make some benefit realisation early as a result of the programme outcomes that we realise. So that will be quite significantly changed for round two. Just very quickly, and you will have seen in the programme steering group papers, and this will be discussed at the programme steering group tomorrow. We got a good selection of responses in round one from volunteers, not all of them, but most of the volunteers that we're working with the civil response organisations. And we, although this information about the replies by constituents is already publicly available in the PhD papers, the one thing I'm going to get this slide to move. All right. Oops. Okay. I think it's just a timeline.
Just please go. Yes. So you go forward.
Yeah, I know. There's a bit of time lag. All right, we'll get there in a minute. I'll just
go forwards or backwards.
I'm trying to back up. I've taken one blank slide in there. Seems to have lost it. Lost the slides. Anybody know what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, just leave it a few seconds to go. So these, again, these are part of the PhD papers, and these are some of the responses that we got from participants. So we got 36 responses out of about 236 organisations. And this is the outline. These are your views on that illustrative plan that we put out and the questions that we asked. I think I pick out the fact that I haven't touched anything.
Please don't use the pointer, just tell us.
I didn't touch anything.
Yeah, no, go forward.
Okay, but anyway, the point, I guess the point is that generally speaking, on the DBT timelines, participants generally felt those were in the right ballpark. There was support for the SIT approach and sequencing, less so for qualification. And understandably so, since there was less information that we provided for qualification. But obviously that was important. But we can talk to you about some of the feedback during today, and certainly we'll discuss the PhD tomorrow. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Okay, there's a bit more detail in here. I don't intend to go through all of it, but I think I would pick out one or two things. The general approach about splitting DBT into critical path and non-critical path activities was generally supported, and we know the consequential change needs to be better clarified and defined. in terms of the way it is considered by the programme and how it's handled by the programme. And that's an important element of the round 2 planning. I would just pick out that probably, yeah, as I say, the SIT approach was generally supported. There were some ideas about bringing forward elements of SIT, like SIT migration, which we thought was a good idea. In fact, are reflected, I think, Kate, in
I'll talk about that.
round 2 plan. I think we've got a test session later as well, where we can talk about some of this stuff. And generally speaking, qualification, there were a lot more questions on qualification, which we will attempt to try and answer better in round 2. So that's really it. If I go to the last slide. So we received 36 responses on the day. We could have got 236, probably just didn't get 236, but it would have been nice to have a few more, and we do hope we can get more in round 2 with the backup, as was already discussed. There was a fair hit rate for questions being answered, but there wasn't very much thinking about how the programme timeline could be aligned more closely to the timetable. And that is the challenge, as we all said, for round 2, is to get that backup, get that thinking, get that evidence that allows us to understand how we close that gap between where you might think things should be and the timetable, and justify the gap where you think one should exist. So we were working through the plan. We are looking at things like DBT, how you get from DBT from M3 through DBT, so that we can start SIT as early as possible. We're looking at duration of SIT and ways we can get faster through SIT. And migration approach is a big topic. I know it's been covered by migration working group to some extent. The migration approach does dictate the nature of the plan, and we are seriously considering being able to do reverse migration in order to allow accommodation for faster passes. You know that. I know that there's varying views on that subject at this stage, but the reality is we are seriously considering that as a base assumption for the round 2 plan in order to give ourselves more opportunity to go faster, for parties to go faster, as you might imagine. And that's the key thing for this. So the one thing I would say, though, is that we always said that round 2 would be 4 weeks. We are thinking that it would be better to make it 3 weeks. The reason being that we do get most of the employers back in very late, and we need, I think everybody would agree, that having sufficient conversation at the back end of round 2 and soon after round 2 is important, because we're shifting the plan quite significantly as we go through the process, and it would be good if we could have a bit more time to engage with you on the back of round 2. So we'd like to discuss that with you today. We will discuss it at PFG tomorrow. We would like to see 3 weeks instead of 4. We know the IPA suggested this and are supportive of it as well. And actually, the way we would alleviate that is to ask a lot less questions this time, but have them much more targeted on key things. There were 57 questions last time. This time around, we tried to make the job more targeted and more specific to try to provoke and to tease out the evidence that we're looking for and try to make the subject a little bit more straightforward. So that's really where we got to on the plan. I don't know, Kate, if you've got any other questions that you want to make, but I might have missed.
No, I think that's fine.
And I know you've got a testing section.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing on testing in the testing section. I'll show you a bit more of the detailed plan. Yeah.
So,
I think
I'll see you later.
Yeah. So,
Keith, you do have lots of questions. But will you please to know, will you please know you've answered some of them in the conversation. So one of the questions was, would we still get around 50 plus odd questions to answer?
No, I just said.
Exactly. You don't.
Alleviate the answer.
Yeah.
If we can agree to make it a 3-week period, which is something I talked to you after the round 2, and get you more joined up, then the quid pro quo is it will make the number of questions less.
But related question, sorry. Will that extend? So will that have a knock-on impact on the third cycle?
No, I think we need more stakeholder conversation between round 2 finishing and developing the plan that can be evidenced in round 3. So we're looking at, can we achieve the outcomes of round 2 that we need, which is more clarity on what the dates actually would look like. And if we don't get a good outcome from round 2, then we have an opportunity to speak to all our key stakeholders and work out how to proceed on the new plan. I think it's fair enough to say, as I said earlier, getting the overly rushed on the plan, it's got to be good enough for people to understand it. And if we don't have enough backup for some of the dates that are being considered, then we might need more time at that point. And I just think it's too rushed to go from round 2 to round 3, and the conversation we've had with senior stakeholders, and I think the support for that. It does ask you to do it a bit more quickly, but as I said, we're trying to make it a bit easier and more targeted.
Cycle 3 will still be kind of 30th of October.
Yes, so there's no intention to change that. It's give us more than round time between 2 and 3.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. The next question is, and I think there might be a little bit of clarification here as well. Has any party said that the current plan is achievable? Am I right to assume it means the current 3 plan, or are we talking the off-gem transition plan?
I would like to say.
No, not you. It's a question to the person who's raised it. The question. If not, we've had feedback, haven't we? That people are.
Feedback on the slide said that generally speaking, but without thinking back at the time, just about that point of view, generally, so it was a sentiment, I would say, more than a kind of responsibility.
Sorry, Keith, could you say was not achievable?
That's what the slide said. The theme was, but most of the respondents felt the existing timetable was not achievable.
Okay, thank you.
But as I say, it was a sentiment, it was a set of statements we received without any justification or reasoning behind.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is, what was the basis of the transitional plan? How were those timescales determined? It feels like the bar is being set quite high to amend an unrealistic plan.
Meaning the migration
Well,
period, I
no,
guess.
you meant the whole
plan, yeah.
What is about the timetable? I honestly haven't seen any underpinning information to support the timetable. The timetable is the timetable. I haven't seen any rate logs or other thinking around the timetable that supports that. So it's difficult to say at this stage, and it's all my time as well.
There's another one which is talking about migration, Kate. It's all about to enable participants to move faster. There needs to be a design and decision on the one-way gate. When will this be made available?
On the one-way gate, well, I think it's related to the migration design as well.
Yeah, so we'll pick it up at the next session, maybe.
Yes, so I think, we are going to.
I think we can hear online.
Sorry. Yeah, so with respect to the one-way gate, we are obviously still intending to have a one-way gate, and what that means is there will be a point in the programme during the migration period where all participants are expected to have qualified and gone live with their new systems and to be able to support any MPANs they acquire on the new arrangements. So there will definitely be that. The question that's coming up at the moment is about whether we include what's sometimes called the revolving door, but what we're trying to call reverse migration, to cover the period, if there's a period between when some participants go live and when the one-way gate, which is milestone 14, comes in, where some participants are on the old arrangements and some are on the new, to have a mechanism whereby a change of supplier can happen from an MPAN being on the new arrangements to on the old. And that is what we're looking at. We're going to when we come out with the replan next week, we're going to make some assumptions about what's underpinning our plan. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess to reiterate that way of thinking is one consideration we have, and we are seriously considering it being a base assumption for the round 2 plan, but we haven't yet decided that at this point. But we ought to put it on the table because I think at this point the migration approach we used around 1 was different. It was more aligned to the current timetable, and more aligned to the TOM than this would be.
There's a question around, can we have a quick walkthrough of the current plan? Is that something we want to do now, or is that something we pick up? Yeah, when we say current plan, that's a question again to the person who's asked it. What do we mean by the current plan? Is it the Ofgem transition plan or the re-plan?
So we walked through the round one plan.
We have.
Through playback sessions. We intend a week into round two to kind of have playback and Q&A type sessions.
Yeah.
We did, in round one, we did very early playbacks. This time we want to do it in the middle because we want people to have time to read the documents. And therefore, we first walk through and give people a chance to ask questions. I think last time around, it was more us playing back rather than people being in a position to ask questions. So we're trying to make it more balanced and put it in the middle of the cycle.
So we would say if any of you want to join that session, please do. Please reach out to your PPC colleagues and they'll direct you to the right webinar where we have that. But there will be opportunities where we will walk through all the planning assumptions and everything that will underpin the round two consultation.
It will be in week two of round two.
Week two of round two, which is the week after next, isn't it? Week commencing the 19th of September. We have... just trying to check how much time do we have. We have a little bit more, don't we? No, we've discussed all of that. Sorry, I'm just going through and there are
No, I think I said in the last.
okay. Can you hear us now?
If you really need to stand up at the
It's like the room's muted.
unmuting.
Yeah.
You should be here as well.
Can I just say one thing about evidence? So one of the things that we've been doing over the last few weeks is we've been having some bilateral meetings supplier or change programs like that, and
in order to get as close, if not achieve the existing timetable, if you need that trust to some extent, if you need to put more resources to get things done, show us your ideas. Talk about how you can put more resources or put more cost in to get the timeline.
Just goes off by its own.
Technology.
I don't know if you can
Go
hear
ahead
me
with that.
now. There's a problem with sound.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, you're back, but it's intermittent. There's a
Yeah,
muting.
okay. We'll keep trying to. It keeps turning off. We'll keep trying to turn it on.
Thank you.
Rachel, the first one says positive move to separate capacity out as a separate issue, but understanding how the role of MDR, and its place in the TOM is also key. And they've also been around how do we ensure that this meets the timelines that need.
So in terms of the role of the MDR, so I'm probably not the right person to answer this question in any level of detail, but my understanding is the legal text that is currently sitting in MP 162 establishes the role from a technical perspective, but also requires that all of those requests, all of those MHHS requests are sent to scheduled reads. We're not suggesting any change to that or any reduction in that, which I think I'm advised by the programme meets the requirements of the programme and enables the TOM to be delivered. So I don't believe that we are suggesting that the way that the mod is treated sort of changes the understanding of the role and the way it works. Ultimately, my understanding is that what the debates have been about are what happens within those 24 hours and whether there are preference for some or for others and what that does to the capacity requirements. And I don't think those materially impact the TOM and the delivery of the TOM. In terms of timelines, so it is essential that we get the MDR role introduction decision quickly if it's not to push the critical path of the programme. We have asked for the mod to come back to us by the end of October, and at risk of putting people on the spot, I have been given an indication that that is achievable. So hopefully that's what will happen. And I also have been given an indication that should then enable us to keep programme timelines on track.
There is one question which says the key purpose of the MDR rule was to reduce the capacity demands on DCC. How can the MDR be split from the capacity issue?
So again, not the person with all the deep knowledge and expertise on all this, but we're not saying that the two things are not going to both be resolved. We're just saying they're being looked at separately. I think the nature of the challenge around capacity and the understanding that is reasonably well developed, and I think that what I'm looking to do is have them resolved on separate timescales, because if we try and resolve them on the same timescale, we end up missing critical path programme inputs. But we're not saying that you can deliver the MDR and not solve the capacity problem. Clearly, we need to solve the capacity issue, but let's do it in a way that doesn't push the programme over the edge.
I think that's about it, Rachel.
There was one I noticed on SLC 47, which I assume is for me, and I can answer. So I'm fully expecting to be publishing the decision on SLC 47 this week. So for whoever it was who was eagerly awaiting that, it's coming.
Thank you, Rachel. So we will take an early break. There are some questions that have come in around migration in the last few minutes, but we'll pick it up during the testing section so everybody can hear. At the moment, I Can you all hear me online? Are we
Yes.
audible, guys? Okay, people can hear us online. That's brilliant. So welcome back. Before we get into the attendee participation bit, we've got Keith Clark, who's coming on to just to answer a few pointed questions that have come up in the discussions at the break. So.
Actually, there's one question specifically. There were a lot of people giving feedback in the break. Just to clarify, it may have been questions also for people who didn't hear the whole session. But to be clear, in terms of the plan, we are looking for people to look at where we are now and plan from this point onwards how they get through the DBT and reach readiness for SIT. So any date for SIT isn't a date to work backwards from. It's illustrative, as I say, to kind of help contextualise the approach for SIT. What we want when people look at their plan and how they can improve timelines and maybe throw more resources or costs or whatever, then what we're looking for is from this point onwards for people to do a left to right plan through their DBT to work out when they will be ready for SIT. And that's the important point. It isn't look at the date we put in there and work backwards to see what you would do within that time. It would be a rather easy way of doing things. It's not what we said we were looking for. So I just want to make that point quite clearly. So hopefully that helps. I'm also planning to provide some guidance when we send the documents out on what good evidence looks like. Hopefully may well help and therefore allow you to tune your answers to our consultation questions to the kind of expectations of evidence that we are looking for. I think that may help also because there seems to be a lot of ambiguity for people and possibly uncertainty about what we're looking for. So we'll do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now do a really quick participant engagement section. It's kind of trying to figure out, to get to know all of you a little bit better. But before we get into that, we think it's probably worth getting our PPC team to stand up so you know the people, most of you have been engaging through this process. So come on. We've got Lauren, Kevin, Amate, Pete. We don't have Marina at the moment. I know some of you must have engaged with Marina, but just so that you know, put some faces to names. And Lauren, we're going to go into do some attendee engagement, aren't we? So I'm going to ask some questions. Before we start doing that, can I ask all of you to stand up, please? This is all a everybody stand up exercise. Sorry about that. Right. So, remain standing if you have spent a year or more in this industry. God, all of you standing. Everybody's done more than that. That's fabulous. Can we remain standing if you've done 3 or more in this industry? Still, this is amazing, isn't it? The amount of people, the experience we've got, the collective experience. Right. I'm going to ask the same. 5 and more? It is absolutely amazing to see. 10 and more. Let's challenge it a little bit. Wow. Should I go 15 or should I go 20? You tell me.
30.
Oh, well, let's come to that in a minute. So let's do 15 for now. This is incredibly amazing, the collective experience that this room has. 20 and more? Right. Lauren, shall I leave it at that for you?
Yes, Adam, you are next to me. Apologies. I know your names are, so it's easy. Would you mind giving the room a bit of an overview of your experience as you are one of our key members?
Sure. I can probably sing a song as well, actually. So I've been with Centrica for 23 years now, sort of the last 10 or so within the regulatory space. Sort of responsible for the sort of larger transformation programs, FMRS and this. What else do you want me to say? Shall I start singing?
I'll take you singing. Thank you. We'll go to one of the ladies next. Would you like to give a bit of an overview? You say your name. Sorry.
My name is Carolyn Burns. I joined the Northern Electric and Gas Call Centre in December 1997 after I left university until I found a proper job. And I never left. Well, I did. I left Empower 8 years ago, and then I've been working for ESG, originally Form Filling Utility Group, for the last 8 years.
Are you enjoying MHHS?
I am. I've been whistle stop tour for the last 2 months, rolling off smart and switching. So it's exciting start of the programme.
Busy then. Yeah. Thank you.
One more. You look like you would like to speak.
Hi, I'm Graham Wood. I'm the large supplier rep. 34 years I've done. Started when I was 10. Predominantly with Centrica, and then for the last 3 years, just working on faster switching and MHHS. And unfortunately, had about 12 years of these kind of programs, Nexus beforehand. So, yeah.
You got your battle wound then?
Yeah. And quite a few wins as well, so that's good.
Good, amazing. Time for one more? Or
We have time for more.
go to this side of the room? Sarah? I know your name, sorry.
Hi, Sarah Jones. Currently working with Repco on the programme. Spent probably 20 plus years in code governance for various code bodies, and the last six years or so on switching. So again, rolled off that programme, and keen to see what lessons we can learn from switching and bring them into the market-wise programme.
Amazing, thank you everyone. Was there anyone with over 30 that could still stay standing? True, absolute truth. I'll be coming for you. I'll be coming for you both at lunch. Look at this room. All of this knowledge. It's amazing.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you for standing. Sorry, I do apologise. But thank you so much. And it just goes to show the amount of knowledge we have collectively, and everything we need to deliver this programme is here in your brains, and that's where we'll need you to come and tell us, how do we do this better? How do we get ahead of the game, and how do we deliver to time, quality, efficiency, and all that good stuff. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our presentation and panel discussion. Lee Northall and Matt Hall will start off talking Elexon's delivery approach. Charlotte, you're going to talk next, and we'll then be joined by Jenny in a joined panel discussion. So can I ask all of you to join me here, please? Lee, do you want to go start with the presentation? Sorry, you're going first, and then it'll be Charlotte.
I'll use the keys. I won't get this one. So, hi everyone, I'm Lee Northall. I'm the Programme Manager on Helix, which is the Elexon's internal programme delivering the internal process and systems changes associated with market-wide half-hourly. So we mobilised the programme back in August 21. That's when the Elexon team got involved. That was a mandated timeline, so we were very conscious that Elexon, as part of the Helix programme, was on a critical path for market-wide half-hourly, needing to make sure that our internal changes to our systems and processes were built, tested internally, ready to support kind of industry-wide testing, so which is sit in terms of in the plan. We went through a procurement process. I think it took about 3.5 months to go through our procurement process. I know some of you guys are in this place now. That was a procurement process to engage our service providers, just to make sure we could be clear enough on the scope. And we'll talk about it in a couple of slides. Matt take us through how we've dealt with that uncertainty. We, if you kind of cast your minds back where the programme was, kind of a year and a half ago, we were trying to get a high review of that scope so we can engage our service providers to make sure they came on this journey with us. And we kicked off this kind of process with the service providers towards the end of January. We had a discovery and design phase where it's going to be elaborated from that high level view of the scope we've had to work that through to get some of the clarity to get started with our delivery phase, which is design, build and test. So where are we against things now? So we're now 4 months into the design, build and test work. So we've already got examples of working code I guess the fundamental thing that has enabled us to get there, and Matt will elaborate, we've taken an agile approach to our delivery. And agile doesn't mean that it's very loose and kind of a don't care about risk and dependencies. There's a lot more rigor that goes with an agile program, I found, than some of the traditional waterfall programs. But you don't wait for 100% perfection before you get started. So we'll talk more about that a bit later on. So we're on track. I know Keith asked a question about against participants' view against the current timeline. We are on track against that original baseline timeline. So we're on track to be ready to support SIT by the end of April. We're recognising some challenges that we've identified along the way. We've got 3 service providers that are delivering changes for us. We've engaged MHHS, Cognizant and CGI, as well as quite a few people from Elexon who are working on the Helix programme. So all working together in a scaled agile approach. And so we've got real great examples of progress. We've got working software. We regularly, every 6 weeks, we go through and do kind of a system-wide demo. So I've got examples of kind of the solutions working together. What we recognised in the outset, and especially when we first responded to Change Press 1, was that because we were on track against the original plan and there were some challenges with the design and the design taking longer, that's given us the risk of rework. But we've recognised that risk. Transport documents have identified a number of areas where we are seeing some rework now, so we're just trying to quantify that. But I think we're in a far better place by starting, recognising some uncertainty than waiting for perfection, because we want to start it now if we're still waiting for everything to be finalised. And so working through the replan, we've got a number of options that we're looking at to try and identify which of those options would have the lowest cost impact with a timeline that could potentially be moving out. Any large project or programme is going to see some plan, timeline and kind of cost impact. We're working through those at the moment. But our key message is we started, we're well progressed, and we've got a lot of good examples of the work that we're delivering. I'll hand over to Matt to take us through how we've managed to deliver.
So I joined here June last year, specifically to deliver Helix, and got in and I discovered something really quite quickly. One was lessons on the critical path. 2 was something too complicated. 3, because we're on the critical path, we need to start soon. And 4, we weren't going to get any requirements to label the ship. I almost walked out after that. But then actually I thought, well, looking around, we do have requirements. So we had the TOM in the CCTG, we had the basis of everything that we're doing written out in the CCTG, and we had the AWG papers. So we had architectural reference, we had some requirements, we had TOM. What we didn't have was a list of requirements that we knew we needed to do. So we went off and made some of those up ourselves and ran with it. And that's got us here, or somewhere closer to here. Working with our hourly settlement program, obviously we're starting to get a better view of requirements than we have done over this calendar year, which is again helped us when we got through procurement, which was the start of January. So we were already starting to see the requirements, and we've used our discovery and design phase the first quarter of the year to kind of really nail down what is those requirements and designs we could, and take a risk-based approach to what we can do and what we can't do. So using scaled agile, and I won't talk any more about that because we've talked about it already. We've been able to prioritise features. We've been able to prioritise those features based on certainty of knowledge. So we know certain things. We knew that MSS was fairly simple. It's adding some numbers together and dividing it. How difficult can that be? We've got so we've taken a risk-based approach. So if we think something's open to challenge or it's open to rework, we've put it down to the end part of it. So things like migration, we haven't really started on yet. For example, where we thought that something would block us if we didn't start it, we've taken some working assumptions. Some of those would run past the central programme to make sure that they're not stupid. Some of them we only really impact internally. And we recognise that the risk of rework is lower than the risk of us not starting because we want a critical path. So we've all the way through we've taken a risk-based approach, and we knew that we had to start, so we started. We're still on track to deliver in April, or end of April, as Lee mentioned. And when we did the procurement phase and when we asked for some funding up front, we recognised that there would be an element of risk, so we costed that into the contingency. The replanning itself and the delays to M5 or the design have presented challenges and presented additional potential rework, and we're impacting those at the moment, but we still think it's the right way to deliver. We're still on track to deliver, and we'll see what replanning and what the structural set funds mean to our bill. I think that's about it.
It's really helpful. Thank you. And I do apologize, I'm not on this. So,
it's for you now too.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Sam, Delivery Director at DCC, representing Smart DCC today. I feel like the problem child of half-hourly settlement, and we'll speak a bit about MP 162 a bit later. I want to go through the history of our input into half-hourly settlement. Then I will talk about MP 162 and our engagement with the programme team. DCC have been working with Ofgem for a number of years. In fact, Simon Harrison used to work for DCC. He was so integral in the programme. He forgot he worked for DCC and now he works on the programme heavily and solely. But we have been part of setting up that target operating model and reviewing what that business case looks like for Ofgem. Certainly in all my time at Smart DCC over the last 3 years, and Rachel and I have been talking about this for a very long time. When we got to the point where we knew that the business case was going to be published, it was going to be mandated, we talked about what was the best route for DCC to do and deliver all the changes that we needed to get done in order to service half-hourly. And it was felt at that point that the SEC-mod route was going to be the best option. For 2 reasons. There was 2 real benefits to delivering through a SEC-mod. One was actually industry's thinking on half-hourly settlement was fairly juvenile. And the mod route gave us an extra route into consultation with customers, with energy suppliers, so that we could understand what the operation would look like, what the services would look and feel like, and it gave us some time to do that. But the second thing, and you've heard it from lots of different speakers today, is we needed to get this done. We were on the critical path. You need our data to service half-hourly. If we don't get that done and delivered to you in a timely fashion, then half-hourly settlement doesn't actually deliver anything because it's all about the data. So it also offered us a route into accelerating a delivery ahead of an Alexon programme team being stood up, having a half-hourly settlement programme supporting the rest of the delivery, and we could get started back in early 2021, which is when we set and started this SEC-mod. The SEC-mod process itself, I love it or you hate it. Lots of people think it's a slow process. I have operated the SEC-mod programme for 3 years again since I started at DCC, and can see the benefit of the engagement that we have with customers to the point where once I get through into delivery, we deliver and we deliver what customers want. And I think that's the most important thing. So all of the work we do up front, talking to you, listening to your concerns, addressing them in that governance phase is really, really important so that we get the right outcome. And I don't see the rejection as a bad thing. I see that as a good thing. So it gives us another opportunity to understand what we're trying to deliver and make sure we deliver the right thing. If I was in delivery and I had to go back and rework it, it would be catastrophic. So this is a good point in time to take stock and understand what it is we're trying to achieve. So MP 162 has been through rounds of consultations. It's really encouraged industry to think about how they're going to use the half-hourly settlement data and how they're going to operate that service. When we get into the decision and MP 162 getting rejected, there's a lot of things that are compounding themselves in that modification, which I think is going to be difficult to unpick. And Ofgem, thankfully, has started that process of unpicking all the various elements that sit behind MP 162. The first is obviously the unpicking of the MDR role from the capacity. And if you haven't read the Ofgem letter, that is the first thing that they've said. MP 162 is solely about what changes need to get made in the Smart Energy Code. And the only change that we were implementing in the Smart Energy Code is the introduction of the new user role, which is the meter data retrieval role, and the agents that might operate under that new user role. And that is the decision that industry need to take around that role. So we will take a little bit of time now understand what's in that role, understand what the cost implications are of that role, and look at making a decision specifically about that usage, the use cases for it, who it benefits, and it will go back around houses very quickly so that we can stay on that critical path. The capacity issues we have to build. So DCC is never scoped or scaled to deal with market-wide half-hourly settlement, and so we are not equipped to deal with all the extra reads that we will have over a 24-hour period. And that's the bit that we've been working with Ofgem in terms of costing and making sure that we get the best deals. That's getting taken out of the delivery of MP162 and will be addressed separately as a capacity conversation with Ofgem. And so that's the fundamental message that Ofgem have published today to Peter Davis. And what does that mean for us? It means that we've got to do a lot of work very quickly to unpick those costs that we put into the impact assessment. MP162 impact assessment still stands. The costs associated with that will be wholly and solely attributed to the introduction of the MDR role, so we'll come back significantly reduced from what they are today. And the majority of those costs, which are predominantly around increases in capacity, will be costed separately and considered by Ofgem and DCC. We have been working with the half-hourly settlement programme team religiously, I would say, for the last year since they've been mobilised. We have regular calls with them. We are in talks all the time about the replan. We are in talks all the time about the dependencies between what we're trying to achieve and DCC and what half-hourly settlement programme are going to achieve. And it's a good time actually that we are looking at replanning and they're also going through a replan so that we can make sure that our critical milestones are aligned and that we get the best outcome. I am completely with Rachel on the urgency of implementing half-hourly settlement, and we are committed to meeting those timescales that Ofgem are putting out, setting out in their aggressive plan. And my team and service providers are doing everything they can in order to meet that. And we continue to agree that we will meet that deadline in the spring of 2024. I feel like it's the cavalry coming over the hill to address some of the issues that we're seeing today in the energy sector. And so it's brilliant to see so many of you here. I welcome the opportunity to tell you a little bit about how DCC are tackling these issues. And I'm around all day, so if anybody does want to grab me, talk to me about anything SEC related or SEC mod related. I hate to say it, I'm a man, but I am. Don't all come at me at once. Thank you.
And we've got Jenny who wants to give a quick few words around delivery.
Hi everyone, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jenny Booth. Next month I would have been in Ofgem for 20 years. Yep, as soon as I came out now, please, I started working. So my experience has been in working in a number of transformational programs, different roles from regulatory lead to design lead, and most recently in the switching program, I have led the design. At one stage, I had 17 consultants working through me on those very early stages from January 2016 to us going live in July last month. I led the testing work stream for a year, looking at SIT and PID for the central services. And currently, I am leading the post-implementation work stream for switching. And then for my teams, I've been, there is work encouraged to get involved in half-hourly settlements. So what I wanted to do for literally 5 minutes is just give you a flavour of the lessons learned, particularly from the switching programme, and just some of the things that I have picked up in other programmes that I think might be useful here. Before I do say anything, I want to caveat that with an apology, because I'm the new girl. I've only been around for 2 weeks, even though I did write the direction to DCC to go and do this. Bear with me if you've heard all of this before. So one of the key learnings I've taken away from all my programme experience is having a very clear definition of the programme scope. There is always a risk for these big transformational programs to be hit with programme and scope creep. So one of the things that is quite clear is to define the absolute scope of the programme. One area that has come up in, I think, all 3 programmes I've worked on was about how consequential changes are managed and actually taken within a program. So this is both downstream and upstream of all the key central points of the program that we're delivering, in this case, the DIP. So one of the things to think about in terms of the scope is the how we are going to manage consequential changes is one of the key areas. Roles and responsibilities. Now, everyone who's run a program understands you have a sponsor, you have an SRO, you have an assurance function, standard program management fare, if you like. But one of the things that I have learned and has worked well in the switching program is that single team ethos. Everyone has an interest in delivering a robust, fit for purpose, timely program. And I think particularly the central delivery partners should have this one team approach. And also, which I'll talk to a little bit in a second, about how we effectively engage our stakeholders, be they internal or external, and actually get that buy-in. Now, it sounds easy to say it, but it's actually one of the hardest things our founders to do within the switching program, to actually hear the stakeholders, address their issues, trying to actually get that one team, let's work together, let's deliver a viable, deliverable, appropriate program did take a lot of effort on a lot of parties. It's already been said, the other one is planning, you can't plan enough. One of the key words I want to put around planning is being agile. With the best will in the world, everyone can write a plan and there are activities and things that you have to do. But as the program evolves, what you find in that first plan, you might need to adjust things. So you must have the resources and the capability to be agile, to actually look at what needs to be changed and actually deal with those changes that need to happen in the plan. So similarly to the switching program, we had to do a replan, and that was brought about by COVID. Understanding the impacts on stakeholders was quite key, and the actual approach we took to actually building the new plan was ensuring that all stakeholders, so we're not talking about the obvious ones, but service providers to those stakeholders had to get involved in that replan. And to my surprise, and I bet that I lost, what we delivered on time, and the program went live on the 18th of July. One thing which we haven't talked about, and maybe we don't need to talk about now, but we just need to have an eye on, is the exit strategy, or the approach to exit. This is a delivery program. Once we've delivered MHHS, then it's a part of the market structure. But we do need to think about how we transition away. What things do we need to look at? And in that transitioning away approach, we also need to think about the unhappy path. Notwithstanding making a decision to go live and everything goes well, what if something goes wrong in the first month, first 2 months, first 3 months? Who should be around to address that? How should that be addressed? And I think some high-level principles should be talked about, particularly when we start thinking about the plan. Some practical issues around the programs. One, reporting. Oh my goodness. I don't even know where to start on that one, but reporting on the various stages to the relevant audience, what is reported, how it's reported, did cause a bit of concern. So when I was leading on the testing part of the switching program, we actually had to stand up daily meetings to actually get the reporting right. There needs to be considered activity about what is reported to whom on what, because we did have to sort of write it on the hoof, and that did take up a lot of people's time. So what is reported, how it's reported, needs to be a decent considered issue. One of the things also, and the lessons learned from the switching program was, yes, we are still at the early stages of designing and so on, but we need to get the operational personnel on side sooner rather than later. So once we've got the design baseline, we need those people who are operating the new systems and service online to understand what's coming to them, you know, be it a few months down the line, so they can understand the design on what they are delivering and what the impacts are. And that's really, really important, because the final point is about understanding their stakeholders when they're operating the new systems, because you can get that, what can I call it, a purist view that they have a system to operate, which they can operate through their NFRs or whatever they need to, but they need to also have an appreciation of what that means to the users of that service and to their stakeholders. And one of the things we found in the switching program, with hindsight, the operational team came on a little bit too late. So we really should get them there at some point where they can transition in to understand this is a new system, these are my stakeholders, right? This is how we need to manage this system. So it's not the what, it's the how. One area also that I haven't heard, but I'm the new girl, so I might have missed it, was around the regulatory framework that sits around all of this. We need to have a central point that's looking at this, because this is the thing, this is the hook for any regulatory entity, regulated entity will look at and say, this is what I have to deliver, and this is the mechanism by which I deliver it through. So wherever that is sitting, it also needs to be working in tandem with the design, so the two of them, the appropriate regulatory obligations can be placed on the right party in relation to delivery of the new arrangements. So the final words I want to have to say is that through the switching program, words have meanings. And if you're talking to a business analyst, a business process designer, a regulatory manager, a commercial manager, whoever, you could use the same words, but they all have different meanings in different contexts. So one of the things we need to do is be quite explicit when we're talking to colleagues. And that leads back to my point about reporting. What are you reporting on, and how are you reporting? So those are the few points that I just want to say. Thank you for your ears.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you all, Lee, Matt, Charlotte, Jenny, thank you all for your insight. We'll start talking about stuff now, a discussion. And let me get your mics, actually. Right. Lee, Matt, I think the first question from me is for you. I found that a really interesting statement, and probably one that we need to ponder about. You mentioned the risk of doing nothing was more than the risk of, so the risk outweighed the risk of rework. And that's probably going to be a bunch of people here might have the same question. I know I've got one asking, how are we not at risk of starting something when we're still in the process of baselining design? But that's exactly what you've done, isn't it? You've gone ahead, you've taken a considered approach. So can you kind of share a little bit, I know you spoke about it, but perhaps to, kind of allay some of the fears that are there. How did you manage that so well?
The first thing so the reason mindset shift was we taking a very traditional approach to the way change programs have been delivered for many, many years, in terms of waiting for 100%, taking a very serial approach, all requirements to be finalised baseline first, and then move on to the next stage. So agile approach has been around for many years as well. So that agile approach was key to us deciding how we were going to approach things. So we didn't need to focus on everything. We were focused on, as Matt said, take a risk-based approach, which areas there was more certainty around, and we started to kind of develop a plan around that. But also that kind of that mindset shift of taking an agile approach to this is also around how we engage with our service providers. So when you try to engage service providers, if you look at a fixed price, fixed scope deliverable, if you haven't got that certainty up front, then there's going to be lots of risk margin added on top. So we put in place a flexible commercial model with our service providers based on agile ways of working. So those are some of the fundamental things that meant we and Electron approach this in a very different way than might be a more traditional approach of being a regulatory-driven change program that looks for the legal text, the legal definition before we then start the change program. So this really, market-wide half hourly has really flipped that on its head, hasn't it, taking that design approach.
Yeah, that's probably really good, because somebody else has talked about when will the code be ready, And that's a key point, isn't it? The code is reflective of the design. So in the reality is the code shouldn't change, unless there's a CR that's actually changed the design. So we are design led is probably the message that you're giving loud and clear, really.
Further builds on that? No, so most of the requirements, well, none of the requirements were written before we started, but the thinking had already been done, right? So the thinking had been done through CCDG, through AWG for years before we started. And what Elexon doesn't lack is experts, so we use those. We recognise that we are less of experts in terms of change, system change. So we, as Dee talked about, we created some kind of flexible contract to work with our suppliers, and that meant through the start of the year and the first 3 months of the year, we were able to use the change experts, the architects from our delivery partners to kind of supplement our industry expertise. And actually, we were able to come up with a decent set of knowledge of what we could deliver now, what we can't deliver now, what we need to wait longer for, and what we could just crack on with. I think that's how we got through.
It's your no regrets, identifying pretty much what's your no regrets work and then figuring out. It sounds very sensible. But there's one more question from the audience, actually. Did Elexon have a comparable consequential change to other market participants?
I don't know what other market participants have in terms of consequential change. We know we have some. We know that Tom, certain parties are going to change. Certain parties we interact with other areas of Elexon. So yes, we're going to have some consequential change. Some of that is fairly obvious. Some of it's less obvious. But again, we're taking the same sort of approach. We know what we know. We know what we don't know. And it's all about addressing the least risky stuff first. It's kind of doing that.
I know there's a lot of questions for you, unfortunately. So what they've said is, when you say none requirements were defined when you started DBT, would you have committed to a start date were you to be asked in a questionnaire?
Well, I joined committing to a start date, so kind of, yeah. But yeah, so we can't just sit and wait. This is exactly the right approach to take to kind of deliver value of mortality as quickly as we can. So absolutely, Elexon had to be one of the early starters. We have to be one of the early finishers. So no, we shouldn't sit and wait until we got all the requirements. We should be cracking on as early as we can. And I think that approach that was mandated to us is absolutely the right approach to take.
And to your point, Lee, you are on track to hit the original timeline, aren't you? The current timeline. So that's an amazing testament to your delivery plan.
So yes, we're on track. We recognise there's some rework. Yeah. So with the transport documents that have come out, I think there's a few areas where we've identified things were different to those original working assumptions, but we've put in place that flexible way of working to be able to deal with that. Fundamental key part of Agile is that it works with change. So all plans do change regardless of the approach. It's having that kind of openness and to be able to address those changes.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. And one last question for you before we get some more in, and I'll get Charlotte and Jenny to answer some instead. There's a question around, do you have any examples of the artifact which could kind of, be used as potential best practice examples for anybody who might want to leverage your learning?
There's a whole wealth. Anyone who's been involved in a large program, we've got terabytes of artifacts on our SharePoint. But I think from the highest level, Matt's also had the target operating model. I guess we could summarise kind of the artifacts that we produce, how you decompose that to lower levels of detail. Talked about not having the requirements in the outset, but high level requirements for kind of reverse engineered for that target operating model. So some of the things are fairly straightforward and fairly obvious what you need to do. Because chess.
Brilliant. And you're around this afternoon, so if anybody wants to pick people's brains. Brilliant, thank you. Charlotte, I know your approach is ever so slightly different, isn't it? I mean, for you, it was, in a way, a little bit more cleaner. Your requirements you kind of anticipated in advance.
Yeah. So we have less dependency on the half-hour settlement programme more widely. DCC's requirement is to service data. I mean, the conversations that we've had, does DCC need to change anything because we already surfaced the Half Valley Settlement SRVs requests. The big question for us is when were those service requests going to be asked for, how frequently, how could we package them up so that we could reduce the amount of capacity required on the network. And all those questions we've been asking ourselves for years now. And those are fundamentally requirement principles to be able to go into the mod. And the TOM itself, for us, the criticality role was the MDR. The MDR role we understood well enough to understand what the implications are on SEC, and that really was fundamentally all we needed to get started.
Yeah, and I think both of you, the recognition that you are the critical path has kind of driven you to take this approach, isn't it? You know you've got to do it, otherwise you'll be the reason the programme isn't delivered on time. So. And I think there are a couple of, I know there are some questions around, it's far more difficult because for both ECC and Elexon, it's you're the central body, you don't have to take a consensus approach to agreeing designs. I believe there are some bodies where you might have to take, there might be some consensus required for design principles. Is there anything from your experience, Jenny? I don't know whether you come in here. Is there anything that parties could do differently to accelerate on the delivery path?
I guess it's. Again, there were 2 points there. The point about being agile, knowing that there is a plan there and things have to be, they necessarily need to be changed. I think that's one of the areas that we picked up in switching program, that we needed in certain instances to meet certain milestones. We needed to be, I can't remember the term now, fast acting, I guess, in terms of getting an understanding of the issue. And I think if people have built that into their resource planning and so on, that will help, because if we find an issue and we are time critical, we want to actually deal with it and resolve it there and then. We can't sort of kick it down the road because we just don't have that luxury of time. So I think building in that engagement capability and having the resource there actually is one thing people should actually build into their resource planning.
It's clarification for you, Jenny, whether you mean agile or flexible. I'm assuming you mean flexible in this context.
I think both, really, because being flexible to adjust your way of doing things is one thing, but actually being ready to change or to actually participate, and not being stuck with, well, we said this is the approach, let's do that. I guess it's really about being agile and flexible in the same sense.
And again, there's another question around, and this is probably to all of you, is the agile approach the right thing to do when you're in a waterfall program? And
So when we were talking about agile, we were talking about a recognised structured agile approach to delivery. So we use the Scaled Agile framework to say, which within is Scrum. Matt and I have got kind of experience of working within organisations that kind of still have a waterfall governance principle, just about how you deliver change. So yes, the points that Jenna mentioned earlier, you've got clear on scope, but you don't have to try and eat the whole cake in one go. It's about which of those kind of fundamental things that you can focus on. Analogy, if we knew we were going to travel to Edinburgh, would you wait until you've got every turn by turn instruction kind of written down in detail in front of you, or do you know that that's the general direction and your kind of your waypoint and where you're heading to? So having that view of the scope and trying to break down that plan, take that kind of risk-based approach of which areas are more certain. So can you build some of those fundamental layers first? So the different methodologies can work together, but you just need to have that clarity of how you're going to be kind of joining them together.
And that framework that supports each organisation. Not everybody would have that capacity, but I suppose it's that understanding. And
but also, you look at global kind of best practice organisations who deliver lots of change, because Google, Facebook, whatever industry it's in, look to some of those other industries and how they deliver change. Yeah. And it's not kind of a very cerebral approach that takes 5+ years. It's about rethinking these things. I think the challenge that we've got, we need to rethink to try and deliver to those regional timelines.
And react with agility, to your point. There is one question again. It's a helix question. Sorry about that, Lee. What level of contingency would you recommend, and what percentages for helix? I don't know if you can answer that, but it's
all the contingency. No, I think that has to be managed on a case-by-case basis. We have to put in quite a bit because we recognise there's a lot of unknowns. I guess it depends when you start and how much unknowns there are.
And that's true in any program, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no project or program which doesn't go with the level of risk. It's understanding and managing that risk through the delivery.
That's exactly how we did it. So there's a bit of a top-down view of kind of the average 20% kind of view of this from the top down, but we also carried out a risk assessment. We looked at all the risks, the key risks with material impacts in our raid log, and we looked at if those risks did materialise, what could be the cost impact of that. So kind of the bottom-up approaches, meet somewhere in the middle, and that's how we worked out our contingency.
Charlotte, sorry. Anything else that you'd like to add to the whole, agile? It's probably different for you, but your MDR role, is that an agile delivery, or is that a?
So, I mean, in terms of pure delivery, we don't really operate an agile process at all at DCC. I mean, we are thinking about operating in an agile way when we get to large code drops. I mean, this isn't a large code drop for us. This is quite small in terms of actual system changes. It's capacity that we're building, which is very much waterfall. It's infrastructure. Anybody that's worked in construction will know they almost can't operate because you've got critical dependencies on things that have to be built before things can happen. So we may operate agile when we get large code drops and test small chunks of code as we build them into the smart metering network. But this one for us is predominantly infrastructure, capacity infrastructure. So agile for us is not really an option.
No, that makes sense. And it just shows the varied, I suppose, delivery approaches within the program. You've got, yourselves with a predominantly waterfall model, but you're still, delivering early or to the critical path. And you've taken a different approach, but it's what fits each organization. It's never a one size fits all, I suppose. There aren't any more questions coming in through Slido. Does anybody else want to ask anything else? I know there's a couple of design questions. I will refer them to the design team when we talk at the stall. So please, whoever's asked 2 questions on the design, reach out to me and I'll get you in touch with some of the design SMEs, please. There is one more question actually. With your use of Agile, will any requirement to use stories remain in your backlog when you go live? What's your approach to Moscow?
I've got a backlog, and that backlog tells me what orders to deliver things in. I shouldn't then need, and I must do something, should do something. With my stakeholders, so I don't feel it's always necessary to have a Moscow waiting as well. We know what we need to do live. Anything else, and then any additional stuff, if you get time to deliver it, it's cost benefit. That's the right would go. I don't know whether
anything that's in scope of MHHS has to be delivered for go live, isn't it? What you're saying is that's part of the delivery.
Yeah, but there's
but you still might have
things
that.
So do we want our
I think we're losing audio again. Do apologise for that. But anything from the floor? Any further questions from the floor?
On your agile approach, do you also emphasise test-driven in that approach? Are you because as participants we obviously need to consider and so we're very much driven by comparing, testing the design and build with an emphasis on test driven.
We are absolutely shifting left on our testing, so we want to test as early as we can in any phase. So we're doing unit testing within sprint. We are doing integration testing as early as possible. When we've got two features that link together, we'll test those as we go. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but if that's...
No, it's just, I mean, you say design, build, test, but quite a lot of presentations on scaled agile tends to also emphasise the test-driven aspect as well. So I just wanted to, it sounds like you're covering it. So.
We're still going through those cycles of, we still test against the design and the related requirements. But it's about how we should kind of break that down into the smaller chunks. Is that where you're going with the question? I'm not sure.
I think so, yeah, because I mean, what I'm interested to explore on, especially in the areas of migration, is how we can look at applying that test-driven approach. Is there any room for parallel, if you like, those are kind of situations?
We've got some migration transition. I talked about earlier, we've prioritised those things later on, just so we can wait for that element of the design to come through. We've got enough features we're focusing on at the moment, so we didn't need to take a punt on what kind of the migration and the transition could be. It's clear that we get a view, certainly important that we get a view of what that migration design looks like. I think that'll ask us whether we take that parallel for comparing. Just not sure whether we fully answered your question, whether we're going to talk about
it's fine. I was just really looking to sort of see where the emphasis was. I think this afternoon.
Let's have a chat later on, just in case we
testing more on that. Lots of my other questions really. What options we've got, what kind of parallel testing we can do, can we within sort of migration situation, cross compare, check the data matches off.
Yeah, I think that hopefully these are some of the key considerations that the program's taking when it comes to the migration side for all of those things you mentioned.
I have one last question for Charlotte, actually. Do you think that the DCC support model is robust enough to support the service level and SLAs? Is this the scope of the mod?
So for us, like I said before, this is something that we already do today. We surface our settlement data. The way we surface SLBs is all reported in through the smart energy code. In terms of delivering more data, well, that's what we're here to do. So the smart energy code absolutely is set up so that we can support it. The SLAs that are in the smart energy code that underpin the SLB for hard settlement are already there. Don't think we have to do anything further, actually. If it is a fit for purpose, then we can always address it, but I can't see anything that we don't already have in place that doesn't support hard settlement data.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I think I'm going to take the last question for today, unless something else crops up in the next 2 minutes. There is a question around the DIB stubs, which I'll take. We do have the timeline for the DIB stub availability in the program replan. And if what we can do is, if you have further questions around it, if you can talk to Kate Goodman when we get into the stalls, or even offline, Kate will point you to where that's called out in the plan. So at the moment it's not available, but it will be available shortly. Right, is there anything else that anybody else wants to ask from the floor? If not, we probably break for lunch. Brilliant. In which case, we break for lunch. We'll see you in an hour's time. Lunch is at the reception. Lunch will be served there. So see you all in a bit. networking, hopefully. I can see some empty rooms, so empty chairs. I hope we haven't bored all of you. But we've got the most exciting subject of them all. We've got testing. Sorry, no, it is fun. I do like testing. So we've got Dom Mooney and Kate Goodman, who's going to talk all about our approach to testing through the test phases. So over to you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Mooney. I'm part of the Programme Test Management team. I'm going to provide an overview of the phases and stages of testing in the test strategy and progression through those. And then I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to then talk through the testing timeline and also talk a bit about the simulators, emulators, and data generators, and also a bit more on migration as well.
Yeah, I think questions on migration. I understand there are some.
Okay, and as with the other presentations, questions are welcome at the end, but I'll also be on the stall with the rest of my colleagues, so welcome you to come there and carry on the conversation. So within the strategy, we've got three main phases of testing, and then beneath those we've got stages as well. So the main phases are pre-integration test, PIT, systems integration test, SIT, and user integration test. Pre-integration test is something that all participants will need to execute and demonstrate evidence of, and that will be a precursor for going through to the subsequent phases. Pre-integration test is going to be run in participants' own environments, and the programme will provide scenarios and also data generators and test harnesses to support execution. We'll be expecting participants to produce an approach and plan, requirements traceability matrix, detailed tests, steps alongside the scenarios, and also to obviously evidence the execution, which will be then subject to test assurance in order to give us confidence to move into subsequent stages. Sorry,
just to double confirm, you just said that for PIT, we will do scenarios?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, depending on the participant type and roles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Systems and integration test is obviously a key phase. This is going to prove that the end-to-end solution has been delivered successfully by testing in an integrated environment with parties. And this will be a phase that's broken down into a number of sub-stages. Participants in the phase will obviously be the DIP provider, the central systems, but we'll also need supplier and data services, meter registration and UMSO, and network operator services, and the DFP, CSS, and DTN. The initial stage for this will be that once we've proven the connectivity of participant test environments into the central integrated environment, we will then run a component integration test, which we plan to build up in a staged fashion. So starting obviously with the DIP and the central systems, then once we build confidence, we'll move along and bring in the other participants. So initially, we'll be putting the system together and confirming the systems integrated as required. This will give us the confidence to then move into a subsequent stage, which is obviously the main bulk of the testing in the phase, which is the functional testing, which will be where we will exercise full end-to-end business processes. In addition to that, we will also be running operational and non-functional testing in the phase, and also migration. Now, I mentioned that all parties will be expected to run PITs. Obviously, those that are involved in SIT, we expect them to have reached parity in terms of the requirement for qualification, but all other parties will be responsible for getting themselves through the qualification process, of which we expect there will be three key elements. One will be the PIT testing, then there will be the execution of testing within an integrated environment. So for UIT and qualification testing, there will be a separate integrated environment for that. And then also there will be the procedural and governance elements, which is dependent on the participant type and role, and the code body that governs that role. Qualification will also be supported by the central systems. And through our systems integration testing and UAT, the SI will be providing, as I mentioned, scenarios, but we'll also be providing data as well, and coordination, scheduling, and also defect and issue management services. Subsequent to qualification, there is also the opportunity for participants to run an end-to-end sandbox phase, and this will be giving you the opportunity to actually continue to exercise any of your business processes that you developed for the solution, and that will be something that won't be so much governed by the programme, but it will be something that will support from environments and data and central issue management. Just moving on. So in terms of progression, I mentioned the approach that we plan to take is during component testing to integrate in a staged fashion so that we build that confidence that we know that we've integrated the system, we know which systems are there, and therefore if we've got issues it'll be easier to triage that and we can build up that confidence. As we move through functional testing, as I said, the current thinking is, and this is the subject of discussion under the qualification working group, is that those parties that have been involved in SIT, they will have met the requirement for the integrated test element of the qualification. All of the participants, as I mentioned, will need to go through the qualification process, which will include obviously the PIT and the SIT testing. And then again, once they've completed that, then they're free to move into the end-to-end sandbox phase should they wish. Okay, and that I'm going to hand over to Kate.
Do you want to take questions on that
sure.
first, and then I'll
Any questions on that?
You have plenty of questions,
Oh,
Dom.
excellent.
So the first question is, I know you've called it out again, but probably worth reiterating. Has it been decided that suppliers who undertake SIT will not be required to qualify?
So that is still our working assumption. We do need to validate that in the working group and working with the code bodies. We're looking for efficiencies where we can. There's, if we've executed scenarios that have been deemed a requirement to get through qualification, I would suggest that there's little benefit in rerunning those during qualification. It'd be another means for us to find an opportunity to try and compress the timescales if we can. So no is the answer to the question, but we are still looking at that.
Okay.
It's worth making the distinguishing between testing and the governance and process that's required for qualification, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the testing is only one component, and the testing will follow PIT and then SIT, but obviously there is the governance procedures as outlined by the code bodies. And that, at the moment, we're looking at each area, and it can be quite a lengthy process. So we'll be looking for opportunities to look to start that process as early as possible, again, so we can mitigate the timescales.
You've got another one related to qualification testing. Dom, will migration and operational testing be part of qualification testing?
So at this stage, we expect there to be non-functional elements involved in the qualification process. As to where that's proven, whether that's in parties' own environments during pre-integration testing is to be determined, whether we're going to do that in the environment. It is to be determined, really, but
which environment it sits in, isn't it?
So, yeah.
We do have a question around the scope of testing in terms of will existing systems such as non-half-hourly DC or MO be included in migration testing?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the things that we're going to look to do in migration testing are to. Oh, is that on? Yeah. Sorry. So the things that we're going to look to do in migration testing are, first of all, test that the design works. So we're going to test the actual process of moving an MPAN from the old arrangements to the new arrangements. So what that will involve is essentially doing a sort of a de-appointment of the DC and the DA and the MOP in the old arrangements. So yes, those systems we would expect to be involved. Now, and then it involves doing an appointment of the MDR and the smart data service.
So we would expect some involvement from the old roles in the old systems in that migration testing. Now, it's likely that that piece of testing is not going to be very long. It needs to be done, but it's not going to take months. So another thing that we're going to do in migration is we are going to do a non-functional test, because after all, one of the main issues about migration, only one of them, it's not the main issue, but one of them is all of the suppliers' abilities and the central system's abilities to support the numbers of MPANs that need to move every day. So there will be some kind of non-functional test of the migration process in the qualification. Now, again, we don't know whether that will be something that we'll ask you to do in your PIT and then ask for evidence of it, or whether we'll actually do, have it as part of the testing that you are supposed to do as part of qualification testing. We don't know.
There's one more for you, Kate. At which point, be it DIP, SIT, or UAT, will the actual DIP, as opposed to the stub, be used?
Right. Okay. So, the DIP is under procurement now, as you all know, and as was said earlier, we're looking to contract in November. So that's going to be under development for some time. So what we as an SI are doing in the meantime is producing some simulators that simulate certain bits of behavior of the DIP. So at the moment, what we've got in production is a simulation of an exchange of some consumption data. And more specifically, for those of you involved in the design, we're simulating interface 21. And that will be available early next year for use by anybody who wants it. And that will kind of help you in your PIT testing, because it will help, it'll be a facility, it's a standardized thing. You can all use the same facility so that you know that your systems can cope with that connection, and everybody will be using the same piece of software. So that will be helpful. So the actual DIP itself will not be used in integrated testing until SIT. So if you are not going the SIT route, if you're just going, doing your development and then going into qualification, you will not interact directly with the DIP until you hit qualification.
Yeah, I think that answers it, Kate. We've got a question around adapter service providers, and it's our expectation that adapter providers can test and satisfy qualification from which PPs can place reliance. This worked in smart and switching.
Yeah.
So is that the same approach?
Yeah. So yes. I mean, that's our intention, absolutely, because we know that it worked very well in smart metering and in switching, and that's what we want to do. The thing that we have yet to decide, and which we are kind of getting closer to, is what is, for example, as a smart data service, what's the unit that has to qualify? Do you qualify as a PSS, or do you have to qualify as a whole SDS? And we're kind of we're edging closer to that, but we're not quite there yet. But the intention is that if it's at all possible, we want to be able to place reliance, because it helps everybody. Yeah.
Last two questions.
Yeah, no.
Will the final settlement position in MHHS consideration in the testing?
The final settlement position in any
non-half hourly be a consideration in the testing at all? Is that a comparison that we're asking for? Are we comparing accuracy? I don't know. It'll be useful if whoever asked the question could explain.
So if it's what I think it is, and you're talking about the final position, the sort of the 14 months position at the end. So what we are going to need to do, obviously we're not going to run a 14-month cycle of testing. So we are going to need to find in the testing a way of reducing the settlement cycle time. So we're currently discussing how we can do that, but we will be doing that in some way so that we can run, you know, the final cycle in less time than it would normally in practice.
Is there a requirement for EES to play a role in SIT?
Yes, there is, yeah. And we've talked to REDCO about this, and initially we said it will be a facilitative role, and because it's a very, you know, it's obviously a useful system and it's useful for verifying results and, you know, verifying that a switch has happened if you want to test the case of what happens when you do a change of supplier and things like that. It's also being discussed in the design at the moment whether there will be a DIP flow to EES. So if there is, then obviously that needs to be tested. But I think regardless of that, we are looking to include it because it's a very useful, helpful tool in testing.
And non-functional testing, would aspects such as RPO, recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives be tested in our testing?
Yes, they will. For participants, again, we're not sure yet whether we will ask for this to be done in qualification or whether it's something that we'll expect you to do in your PIT and evidence. Obviously in SIT, we've got a non-functional test, and again, the scope of that is under discussion and it needs better definition, but we will be doing non-functional testing. We'll expect you to do it in PIT. We will do some in SIT, and potentially there'll be some in qualification, although I think it's more likely it's going to be in PIT with evidence.
Yeah, so topics that we're looking at the moment, discussing is the environmental implications for that kind of testing in SIT. You know, it could be destructive to the actual functional testing schedule that we're running. And you know, any additional environments, that's an impact for everyone involved. So that's a topic that's ongoing.
And also we need to know which of these are relevant from an integrated testing perspective. If you can do it in PIT and evidence it properly. Right, that's all we've got. Anything more before we hand the mic over to Kate? Oh.
Probably not. You mentioned the traceability.
Sorry, no, hang on a second, Dave.
Hi. Requirements traceability was mentioned for PIT. Would that be the current requirements that are in the design that will need to be matrixed against, or will there be a higher level?
I think it's likely to be the current ones. Yeah, but again, you know, we haven't nailed this down completely. Yeah. Okay.
Will the DTN flows coexist with DIP? Is that a DIP?
Does somebody more qualified than me want to answer this before I jump in?
We'll take this away and maybe we can pick this up at the design stalls. So whoever's asked this, whoever's asked this question, please reach out and we'll make sure it's answered during the design.
Presumably you're referring to the DTN flows that are eventually migrating to the DIP.
Or is it that post, you know, Tom, where you will have some existing flows which aren't migrated and will.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously the DTN will stay because there are many flows on it that aren't migrating to the DIP. But exactly how that transition works and over what period the two systems will coexist for the things that are moving, I don't really know about that. So anybody on the design team can help you with that.
Okay, that's about it. Oh, Jenny's got a question. Let me get your mic.
Just a clarification point for me, really. I didn't see any testing relating to the comms providers in the sense of their capability to meet all the requirements and the data flows there. Is that integrated in some other aspect, or is it just a new form of words we're using?
So,
Yeah, I think it's just knowing. Yeah, it's just knowing about the design and things. So the dip is the comms essentially. So the dip is. I'll explain it when I come on to do this slide. Yeah, why don't I do that? Shall I?
We've got some questions there.
Yeah, just a question about the migration of MPANs and old and new arrangements. What is the situation with that in terms of opportunities to have parallel those things in parallel? Is it that you, once you've committed, that's it, you're in the new arrangements, or is there opportunities to have them running in parallel?
Right. So this is coming on to the thing that I think some people have talked about earlier on about this migration reversal. So what we're doing at the moment, and this is one of the key areas that we've put a lot of focus on, but because it is very complex, it's taking some time to resolve. So we've got 4 different options on the table for the fundamental way that we do migration. And when I say the way we do it, I mean not the design of how you do a de-appoint and how you do an appoint and, you know, in the old and the new systems and so on. I mean the approach that we're taking to moving the MPANs. So what is currently in the plan that has been sent out in round 1 is an assumption that unmetered and advanced, all participants in those segments will go live with their new systems on a single day. And at that point, when they go live, they haven't got any MPANs in the new arrangements. But then at that point, they then start moving them over. And then the same for smart on a slightly later date. All smart participants go live on the same day, and they can then accept MPANs under the new arrangements. Now, we did that because that was consistent with the design as it existed. And we've been working with the migration working group, and we were well aware that there were problems with that and that we were likely to revise it. So what we've been in the time between issuing for round 1 and now, we've been looking at the different options that are available. And one of the things that we are really keen to do, as you heard from various speakers earlier on, is accelerate this program as fast as is reasonable and practicable, you know, without creating great risk for industry, for anybody. But it's really important that we get this done as quickly as we possibly can. And therefore, one of the things that we want to try to do to underpin that is try to set the scene for participants who wish to go ready, wish to go live with their new systems early, for them to be able to do so. In other words, you know, moving at the, enabling the fastest to move at their pace without sort of slowing the whole program down to move at the pace of the slowest. So a problem that we have with allowing some participants to go live early and then others to come in later is that you get a period where some suppliers are live on the new arrangements, others are live on the old arrangements. So if you have an MPAN which is moved to the new arrangements and then that customer changes supplier to a supplier who's only on the old arrangements, the question is, can you move back? Now, what we've assumed in the plan at the moment is that you can't. And that's been under some scrutiny, because if you can't do that, it creates all sorts of problems, because you will have to understand in brokers and PCWs will have to understand that if an MPAN's gone over to the new arrangements, who then can it be changed to? You know, which suppliers are on the new arrangements, which are still on the old, and therefore you can't move to that supplier. And then there's probably got to be system, stoppers put in place on the CSS to say, actually, we know this MPAN's on the new arrangements, therefore you can't move to this supplier because it's not on the new arrangement. And how do you get that data there? So it's hugely complex. So there are issues. We knew that there were issues with the plan as the way we've got it. So the option that we're seriously exploring at the moment is, okay, what if we put in place an extra piece of functionality which did allow you to move from the new arrangements back to the old arrangements for that period of, which is likely to be a few months, for that period between when the first supplier goes live on the new arrangements and what we talked about earlier as being the one-way gate, where everybody is mandated by their license conditions to be ready, qualified and live with their new systems up and running and ready to accept MPANs. So we are seriously looking at that option for reversal of migration. Now, it was originally thought that it was so complex, it was really not worth entertaining. Now, we've done a bit more analysis and it seems not so. But what I would do is, if you're interested in things like this, please come to the Migration Working Group, which is being held on Thursday. You can do that by, if you're not already involved, you can do that by contacting the PMO and getting an invite. And it's really, it's a really interesting forum. There's good debate and people understand how important it is. We had 51 participants last time, which I think is, pretty high number. So please come along to that, because we will be talking about all the technical detail behind that reverse migration. Is that?
I was more thinking about, we've got generation assets predominantly, we haven't got retail. So we're looking at migrating a wind farm, a hydro site, across, and ideally what we'd like to be able to do is to have some kind of parallel run where we can sort of check that the thing is actually giving us the same results across the two.
Yeah, so there's some of the earlier documentation that was produced last year was talking about sort of parallel run. What that meant was not that an MPAN would be settling in both systems and you're comparing the results. We're definitely not doing that. And we are trying to move away from the term parallel run, because I think that's what it implies. What is happening, the period where they were talking about a parallel run simply meant that the new arrangements will be up and running, the old arrangements will still be running, both will be running in parallel. However, an MPAN can only be either on the old arrangements or the new arrangements, not both. So the answer to that question is no. You have to move over. Yeah, but in terms of testing, so the migration testing in SIT will test that, and that will be the part of the point of it. That it's sort of two aspects of testing that I said, that we'll be testing the mechanism. We'll obviously be testing the fact that we're not just testing it from the point of view of the new system, we're testing it from the point of view of the current arrangements. When we've moved an MPAN across, does that really mean it's no longer in the current in the current arrangements? Making sure that there's no double counting, making sure that nothing's got lost in the move. All of that stuff will be really the purpose of what we're trying to test in SIT migration.
Kate, there's a couple of migration questions. It might be ones that you might have to refer to Migration Working Group. Yep. But the first one's talking about, isn't this a problem for central services, including central switching, rather than a supplier/participant managing the reversal?
I think it is a problem for central services like CSS, but it's also a supplier problem, because the supply, if you've got something like, if you've got a situation where you've got the old arrangements and the new arrangements both running, and you cannot move back, once your MPAN's gone on to the new arrangements, you can't move back. Well, suppliers will want to know about that, because their sales teams don't want to go around focusing their efforts on gaining customers that they can't possibly gain if they're only on the old arrangements. You know, it's pointless getting people to make calls if an MPAN's already moved over and you know that you can't possibly regain it. Things like that. So there are much wider implications than just on the central systems.
And related to that, Kate, there is a question around, there was no mention of the customer here. Isn't there a requirement to facilitate reverse migration for customers, which is...
Yeah, so, I mean, the whole, a lot of issues about the approach that we've put in the currently proposed plan are to do with the fact that if you don't have a reverse, if you have some participants going live early and then others coming in over a period, and you don't have a reverse migration, you restrict consumer choice. And that is really a big deal. You know, that's obviously a big deal for Ofgem. It's a big deal for the industry in general. And that is one of the things that in considering this reverse migration option that we're looking at.
We've got a couple of more, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm trying to get all the migration ones out first. So will suppliers have to migrate the whole portfolio all at once, or is there, you know, subgroups that can be moved?
Yeah. So because there will be there'll be limits to the number of MPANs that can be moved every day. I mean, you're all aware of the current 20,000 change of suppliers per supplier per MPRS at the moment, and obviously, you know, that's a BAU limit, and that's not predicated on all of you all doing 20,000 every day. So, you know, there will be system limits, and so what we will do as a programme, and the SI within the programme will have to manage the migration, and again, you know, all of these details need to be worked out, but basically we see that the SI will be setting limits on a supply, well, more than limits, saying to a supplier, look, you need to be migrating, you know, this week, you need to be migrating between X and Y thousand MPANs in this area and this number in this area and so on. And it's not just the MPRS systems that we need to be careful about. There's, you know, the exiting agents, the new agents coming in, all of the systems that make up the whole kind of complex ecosystem. There are going to be system limits at each point that we will need to somehow factor in, and that all of that management will be a complex process. So, you know, just to reiterate, when you go live with your system, no MPANs in it, and then we're expecting a progressive movement of the MPANs across from your old systems during the migration period.
There's a question around if a supplier can't gain a supply due to old new arrangements, will there be any grace from the regulator?
I don't believe so. I mean, that's really a question for Ofgem, but as I understand it, the answer is no. I mean,
there's a PSC obligation that suppliers who don't meet,
There's already a BSC obligation that suppliers that don't meet the M14 milestone can't take on new customers. So that's already set in regulation.
There's a question there.
Thanks, Jason.
Hello. I think we just demonstrated how important this is to everyone in the migration activity. I don't want to kind of add more onto the fire, but
yes, you do.
I think there's also wider implications on things like settlement, for example. I mean, there's obviously very big commercial considerations, which I think you've identified, things like that. I think realistically, some mechanism to ensure the market doesn't stall for a couple of months while we all do this is really important. But there will also be impacts on things like settlement, like group correction factor, for example, is likely to shift. I'm thinking of, and this is where I start going to war stories, the gas market. It moved to a brand new system. Unidentified gas then became massively volatile. Everyone became very concerned about it because the losses, how we worked out losses changed. Are we covering that as well in this migration?
kind of group as well, or is that something we need to look at more widely? Because if we don't, I'm sure we'll see some very volatile movement of energy.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, that's not something that we've that's been raised before, so that's really useful to have it raised. Okay.
I mean, I think that's the thing. I think it's fantastic you guys are looking at this now, because I think that migration is going to be the most important and the thing that everyone's going to focus on. It does feel like, if anything, it needs to be just why it needs to be a whole piece on its own.
Yeah, kind of law of unintended consequences sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Really good point. Jason, do you want to add something to that?
It's not something that's considered under the scope at the moment. So we'll start that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
There seems to be lots of migration questions, but I suspect all of these are migration related.
Yeah.
Shall we go to the testing? I'm only conscious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But what we will do is there is a migration working group later this week, and there's a stall. So please take all your questions there, and we'll collate all of them. And if we haven't responded to you in the next few days, do let us know, and we'll make sure we come back with either a holding position or a response. Kay, there's one testing question we might want to take before you get into that. Have the test timelines been finalised? Do we have any low-level details justifying the timelines?
Okay, so have they been finalised? Absolutely not. And just I'll refer you back to what Keith said earlier this morning, that the proposals that we're going to put out on Monday with the proposed plan is just that. It is a proposal. It's not agreed. It's not been finalised. It is our current thinking, and it's what we would like you to give feedback on, for you to come and say it's too long because we think you've over-egged it in this and this respect, and we don't think it's going to impact so many systems or whatever, or we think it's not long enough. And the reason for that is that we've got 100 main business processes. They are supported by 50 systems. This change is going to touch 95% of those systems. We want really concrete evidence. So absolutely not. And we need it all bolstered by your evidence. Okay, right. So I'll be brief with this. So I think there was a question this morning about test stubs and when were we going to provide simulators and things. So let me talk about that first. So you can see on this slide, this is taken from the round one plan, where we were giving durations but not dates, just to kind of stimulate the debate. So the first two things are relevant to PIT. So we're providing some facilities that we think will be useful to you guys in your own PIT testing. Then there's some other things that we feel we need for SIT. And then there's some further things which potentially may be needed in to support the testing service effectively, because it's like, the UIT environment will be like a testing service that you can then plug into and do your qualification, do your sandbox and so on. So the things that we're providing to support PIT are some simulators and a data generator. And the intent behind the simulators is to mimic the interaction with the DIP in a relatively uncomplex way, so that you guys have got an endpoint you can call from your systems, and it, in a basic way, it will. So if you're sending something into the DIP on an interface, it will receive that, and it will send back a response as if the DIP had responded. Now, it's not going to do complex business validation. It will do basic format validation. And there will, so that's sending in. There'll also be a sending out interface where, the publish interface, where the simulator can publish information to you, and then you can receive it, and it will look as if it came from the DIP. So what we the original intent was to provide something that would look like LSS and look like MDS. So that's what we're developing first. What we're looking at, and we've been working with the SRO to see if we can provide a simulation for all of the interfaces. So that for every interface in the design, I think with the exception of the reports, there would be a simulator that you could hook up to test. So that's the first thing we're producing, and the PIT stubs, the LSS and MDS simulators, the intention is that they would be delivered early next year. The next thing is a data generator, and again, the intent here was to provide something which generated data in relatively large quantities that might be useful to all of you, because the big thing about this obviously is that we're dealing with large quantities of consumption data, larger quantities than we have done before. So it seemed like it might be a useful thing to give, particularly for the data services, to say, okay, here's something, give it a list of MPANs, give it a few other parameters, it will provide realistic consumption data that you can use in your testing that won't, that will pass the validations and so on. And that will be delivered a bit later in the year. So that's the intent with things that are going to support your PIT. Then for SIT, what we are intending to do is to produce an emulator which basically does the functionality of a smart data service. So it will take in consumption data and then it will spit out the half-hourly consumption data, having filled in any holes as required using load chains. And the same for the advanced. And then it will work out the result and compare it with the actual result. So it's a kind of almost like a digital twin. So it's checking on the calculations done by the smart data service and the advanced data service. And that's for our use in SIT. So you can see that there's two portions to this. You've got the non-SIT participants at the top and then the SIT participants below. Basically, the plan, as issued already, has something like 30 months for a participant to do DBT if they're going the SIT route. And then at the end of that, there's qualification and there's potentially end-to-end sandbox testing, should the participant wish to, before going live. So for the non-SIT participants, there's a substantial time to do your development. Now, that said, in accordance with all the intent to do this as quickly as is practicable, in the reissue plan, we're going to be putting forward certain proposals that will bring in that timeline. And then if you look at SIT, we've got SIT participants basically have 12 months to do their DBT and get everything ready, do their PIT, and then submit the system for integration. And we've got 3.5 months to integrate all the components. And like Dom said, we start off with the starting point is we've got the DIB. That's the first time we've got the DIB to actually integrate with other things. Obviously, we've got DIB testing before that in a PIT sense, but this is DIP being integrated with other things. So we integrate the DIP with the ECS. We then pull in the data services. We then pull in registration services, and so on. And we build up the whole picture until we've got the whole kind of ecosystem all talking to each other. And once that's all working well, then we do the SIT functional testing. Once we've sufficiently proved the system functionally, we will then start non-functional testing. And once functional testing is finished, we'll do migration testing, and then there'll be operational testing as well at the end. And then what we've said is that participants in SIT, once they've got to a certain stage in SIT, and again, to be defined, they will be allowed to go test in the end-to-end sandbox environment, because we understand the importance of you guys doing your own testing that you wish to do, that exercise your business scenarios and so on, and to provide an environment for you to do that. And we saw that in smart metering, that was a really important stage. So that's the overall timeline as we have it in round one. Now, that is changing in what we're going to send out to you on Monday. So a couple of the things that we've done is we're putting together some proposals for how we can de-risk the component integration testing. And we're therefore going to be showing you a shortened component integration test. We're also been looking at ways in which we can get some participants through SIT as quickly as possible. So that's not everybody, but it's a cohort that would go through and finish SIT and be able to drop into end-to-end sandbox really early, and then potentially be early adopters going live as early as possible. So that's another thing in there. And then another thing that we're doing in the next round is that people have made comments about the migration testing being late on. Yeah, absolutely fair point. So what we're doing is we're saying that we'll run the migration testing much earlier, because that can be done in parallel with SIT functional, in fact, because it's a separate process. It doesn't build on what we're doing in SIT functional too much. It's a separate thing. So there are certain adjustments that we are making in the next round. Now, Jenny, remind me your question, and has that answered it?
My question was understanding that the capacity development that is doing. How are we going to test the performance of the capacity, making sure the capacity is
yeah. So again, we have not decided whether that will be a SIT test or a PIT test. I suspect it'll be a PIT test, because typically the DCC does all its performance testing in its own environment, not hooked up to everybody else, which is fine. And yes, absolutely, we would be testing that totally.
Would that, yeah. I guess it's where it will fit in. Would it be?
So that will be part of the DBT.
Yeah, I guess it's. I'm still using switching narrative in my head. So the end-to-end bit, would it be there, or would it be separate components?
So in switching terms, there was an end-to-end testing stage, which was kind of managed by the SI. We haven't got a similar thing here. What we've got is we've got the end-to-end sandbox, which is optional. It's not mandatory, and you can do what you like in that. It's not mandated scenarios. And then testing the system end-to-end is part of SIT functional. Yeah.
Okay, so no more questions at the moment. Unless...
Sorry, one more on that. If a party decides that it's better for them to go through the non-SIT route,
yeah,
will the qualification process be a single qualification process, or will there need to be two processes? One process that follows through on the capability for delivering MHHS, and a second process that achieves requirements specified in the REC and the BSc?
So we're trying to get our terminology clean at the moment, which we haven't done in the past. So we're trying to talk about qualification, meaning the process that the BSc currently follows. So you've got your SAD, your self-assessment document, all of that process. That will absolutely have to be done. Now, as I understand it, for BSc qualification, you don't have to do specified testing in the same way as you have to do UEPT on faster switching or UEPT in smart metering. What we are saying as a programme is we do want to specify some testing that you come and do on our test environment. Yeah. So there will be those two aspects to it. Now, quite how it's managed, we're still in discussion with BSC. We're obviously talking to RECCO as well. We need to talk to the SEC guys. You know, we need to make sure that the piece hangs together and make sure it's clear who has responsibility for what. So that's in development.
Could I ask that in doing that, you really consider that a single process that covers all requirements end to end, because otherwise we're going to have people running around testing this, testing that, testing the other, filling paperwork in for one code, filling paperwork in for the other code, etc. And I do believe that it needs to be a single qualification process through the non-SIT route.
Yeah, we've had other comments to that effect, and we're certainly bearing that in mind. I mean, I think there may be certain things where we say that's over to you, like the MDR, for example, is SEC. So it may be that we say that's your bag, SEC. You know, you need to do that. In terms of where a particular role has elements of qualification in the BSc, has elements in the REC, we'll do as much as we possibly practically can to unify that and make it simple for you guys.
If I could just reach out to reps from RECCO and BSc code and ask that you consider that in what you're doing in the code changes.
Okay, can we just use this as an opportunity to advertise the qualification working group, because that's exactly the nature of the discussion we're having in there. So please do attend the qualification working group. That's exactly the nature of the discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So so qualification working group, and again, you know, same as the plug for the migration working group, just get in touch with the PMO at mhhsprogram.co.uk, and they will invite you to the next QWG, which I think is 2 weeks, next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Okay, it's an easy question for you. Who's developing the test tubes?
Explica.
Right.
And we're actually developing them at the moment. So the pit stubs, the team is working on them right now.
There's a couple of questions on migration. It's around, the first one's around in accelerating some parties through early go live. Are we exacerbating problems caused by the one-way gate? It's one we need to assess, don't we, as part of our options analysis to definitely say it doesn't.
Yes.
But that's where we will commute into the migration working group, and we can have that constructive discussions there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say come to the migration working group, and we can discuss that there. I mean, I'm not sure completely about the question, because I'm not sure how it exacerbates I'm not sure about problems from the one-way gate where you've got a mandated time when you all have to be live. Does somebody want to expand on the problems associated with that?
My question.
Oh, right. Hi.
I think it's just trying to understand that, pushing people through what the difference is between the backstop and is. You see, I think it's the terminology about getting people through as quickly as possible. Does that mean extend that period of time before the backstop everybody needs to be ready, which I think is 7:14 or not? So you've got this, we want to allow people to go live, but does that create a risk that you have that process in place for longer as a consequence of that?
Right. Okay, I'm with you. It does a bit, yes, but I think. A lot of what we're going to be doing on the programme is going to be in dialogue with you guys. The PPC are already, they've got good relationships with the suppliers and all the other participants, and they're going to be monitoring people's progress, and they are going to be picking up if some parties look like they're not going to make it at the right time, and picking up on that early enough so that something can be done about it. But there is that risk, Paul. Yeah.
Another migration question for you, Kate. Is M14 a reasonable milestone if it means early adopters with new arrangements can effectively stop small suppliers from gaining new arrangement customers?
So I think it's important not to conflate M14, which Ofgem has called the one-way gate, with this reversal of migration. So M14 is, and as Jason said earlier, it's already in the BSc. It's the place, it's the date where all participant systems have to be qualified and live on the new arrangements and able to accept MPANs under the new arrangements. So that's that. And then the stopping small supply, if the large suppliers come in early, they wouldn't be stopping small suppliers from gaining if we have reverse migration in place. And I think there is complexity to reverse migration. I don't think anybody can deny that, but there are really a lot of benefits. And that is exactly what we're working through at the moment. And, the more we dig into it, the more we see the benefits and the less we see of the complexity. So all of that does need to be gone through. And we're doing the same for the other options, the options where you have to actually put a stop on people on the old arrangements, gaining new customers and things like that. If you had to do that before M14, the complexity involved in that. So we're investigating all the options.
I think that's about it. Kate, no more questions. That's all. Unless there's any more for any more? Well, in which case, is it time to hand over the mic to IPA? Colin and Sajwal Dash. Has Sajwal left as well? Is it only you, Colin? Sajwal.
There,
right.
I'll run things. So.
Perfect. So Colin's going to talk about assurance of testing.
Yeah, hopefully we've got some slides up. Yeah, that's strange. Okay, excellent, wonderful. So, my name's on there. Colin Bazant. I sat down with 15 years worth of industry experience, but I actually got 30 years in program assurance. And I would like to say, people tend to get a sort of funny feeling about assurance. I'm here to find things that are going wrong. And yes, I'm here to call out things which don't sound right so that we can give them oxygen and people can deal with them. Also on programs like this, I'm aware you get collective anxiety at times. And collective anxiety is quite dangerous because people can imagine the problem is much bigger. And my role is also to try and call out where things don't need to be worried about as much as people are worried about it. And the idea there is you get that good free flow of information and people can trust the message being given in the programme, which means we can move as fast as possible whilst moving safely. And if I do that, and I do it well, then everyone will know in a few years' time, what do you Colin actually do? Because you won't notice it. And if I am there doing something dramatic, you do notice it. I've probably got something wrong somewhere. Mostly I'm going to talk about test assurance, and I'm going to start off by talking about a few principles. We've already sort of touched on the first one, it's transparent, and it sort of goes with independent as well. We don't have anything to gain or lose by this programme, and therefore we can look at things objectively. Some of us will already seen us involved in things like MP 162 already, where we're trying to weigh up things from both sides and try and give a balanced view. And we want to be open and honest about what we're doing there. It's there for the programme, and that really leads on to the next principle, which is supportive. We might have awkward and difficult conversations with people, but the whole idea is that is trying to support programme success. The next one, I'm going to get a bit technical now, is non-duplicative. Some of you might have heard of a three-line defence model, and it's a principle of assurance that works really well. So the first line of defence is what you've been hearing already from the programme. That is what they do day in, day out, is trying to get things right. And we're not trying to do what they're doing. Many of you will have come across people like Simon Harrison and his QA team, and they are effectively a second line of defence. They're looking at every single artefact that's being developed and designed
and trying to make sure it reaches the right design standard. We are the third line of defence, which is to make sure that all the various programme mechanisms are there working together, and if one of them starts to fail, or if there's issues with it, that's where we call things out and say, should it work better? So again, Kate's there to deliver a testing programme. We're not there to try and duplicate what she's doing. We're there to observe what's going on and to try and make sure that if there's anything that's going wrong with it, we can call that out. But equally, if people are worried about it, and we don't think they need to be worried about it, that we can say, look, actually, this makes sense, and here is why. And now why, and there's an underlying principle here in any insurance, is supported by evidence. We've got the facts to say, look, you've tested at this rate, this is the volume, this is the reason why it's going to accelerate. We've examined those factors, this is why we're happy with them. So then, focusing on test assurance, you're going to see us involved in 3 areas, and we're sort of starting the first one now, which is this overall test strategy. So what Kate put up. Should that work? Will it cover all the areas that you would expect? Are there any aspects of the functionality in terms of this way, shape or form migration it wouldn't cover? Does it do things in broadly the right order and with the right level of detail? It doesn't mean going down to every exhaustive level of plan, but basically, if this was your course that you charted, I think we used to how we're going to get to Edinburgh earlier, you should end up in Edinburgh, if you wish to go to Edinburgh, of course. The next bit that we'll look at is the test preparation and design. So this is then saying, has everything got ready? So when the programme is looking at PIT and qualifications and things like that, have those criteria been applied properly and fairly? Because what we don't want is people sort of being too rigid and making it too difficult to get in, which means that we slow everything down. But also we don't want people to be going, look, we've got to get someone in. You'll be all right. I know there's a few things that are not there. And we sit there and go, actually, that's not going to test things properly, and that will introduce risk going on later on. And then the last bit that we will do is test execution. So we'll be looking at the actual overall test process and going, did you do this properly? Have you got the right mechanisms? Have you been rigorous enough with this? All testing is going to have issues. All testing is going to have defects. Have you got the plans for the rework and work off plans for solving those? Are you capitalising and resolving those issues appropriately and fairly and sensibly? At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is turn around to everybody and saying, look, this is the testing. It gave you a result you can believe in. You can trust these systems. That's our goal. And if there's anything that sort of steers away from that, that's when we start to look back to you saying, we think you should do more here, or we think you should do this differently. Again, going back to those principles of being transparent, independent, supportive, aiming for the programme goals. I'm not going to go into this in detail. We've got a booth outside. We can talk to you in all the various details about the steps there, and you'll find that in my sort of coverage I've just done, you'll see I've picked up in a lot of those various different detailed steps that we're doing. We tend to use the word exam questions because basically if a programme can pass the exam question, it's probably in good shape. If it can't answer an exam question, it probably isn't in good shape and it needs to do more in that area. And again, there's an operating model here, which again we can talk to you in detail, but this is really trying to make sure that we've got the right kind of governance and process for gathering evidence and making sure we get to the right conclusion. We work with all the other parties in here, so that's a part of the supportive thing. I will highlight independent because that's critical for us, giving people confidence. If you think we're biased in some way, if you think we're trying to head for a too positive outcome or we're too negative, or if we're steered to one side or the other, then we won't be giving you so much confidence and our assurance won't have so much value. It's risk-based. We will look at things where we are more worried and we will use that 30 years worth of programme experience, that 15 years worth of industry experience. Those will be our, if you like, our antenna for picking things in. But our argument around tenure is much broader. I mean, one of the things I said to various people, as I called up to them here, is watching people's behaviour in meetings, watching how the programme is running. All that gives clues as to whether things are running smoothly or whether there's tension. That gives us another lens in terms of the facts that we've gathered, and it helps us to interpret those facts. It doesn't mean that you have a conversation with the by a water cooler and it's going to be recorded and everything else like that. It's just going to be something that gives me a sign to say that someone is worried about this. If they're worried about it, I need to treat that worry carefully and honour that worry, because if I haven't addressed that worry, then they're still going to be worried. Now, it might not be a real worry. It might just be something I'm worried about things all the time. Worried about my calendar for tomorrow, actually. But some of those are real worries. I've got a meeting cash. Some of them are not, but actually one of those meetings I don't need to go to. It's the same thing with the issues on the programme here. Something people are going to be worried about, and we need to be much more worried about it because it's going to be an issue. Sometimes it's about keeping confidence, and that will be in our presentation. Back going, people have been worried about this, but we think it's okay. We said it's risk-based. Deep dive is the other side of things. If there is an aspect of testing that's not working well, and we've talked about migration here, so I'm using this example rather than something that will go wrong. But if there was an issue with migration testing, then we would sit down and go, we need to look at this. We need to devise a set of activities around that to really answer what people are worried about so that we can get to the heart of it. And if there's something that needs to be done, we can make those recommendations. And if there's something that actually is not a worry, then we can give people the confidence it's working. And I think that we've already picked up the last one there in terms of opportunity, which is we're here as a sounding board, and people are worried. We're quite happy to talk to us. Two things that we are now going to do as the replan progresses and there's more detail in terms of the test plan. We will develop a test assurance plan, so we will take these exam questions and this approach, and then we will build that into step-by-step activity that we are going to do. And then we'll be feeding back to the testing groups and where necessary, because I sit on the design advisory group as well. So if there's questions about it there, we can send back to all the relevant forums, right up to the steering group. So that's our whistle-stop tour of test assurance and a little bit of background about the IPA as a whole. And again, happy to take questions.
You have one, actually. Will the IPA
giving test quality guidance to participants around test strategy, plans, test cases, scenarios, etc.?
So I think that the primary, for participants, the primary indication of test quality will be that the programme itself in case you will be saying, this is what you need to do. That's the primary level of communication. We will obviously be looking at that beforehand. So if cases, well, actually, if you test things with one eye closed and it's all right, you'll be okay. We might be saying you need to do some more work. And similarly, if we feel that there isn't enough around evidence capture, which is quite a common thing with testing, if that's the case, then we'd obviously want to stress that. And so our feedback then would be generally to Kate to say, look, I think you need to improve your communication out to the market. I think when it comes to test execution and quality of execution, such like where we've got a wider remit to look at what people are doing, if there's then the broader participant assurance, then we may well be saying, well, actually, the party X, we've had a look, or maybe people said you're not testing that well. We've had a look, and the results suggest you're not testing that well. We might then be having some conversations there. But the main part in terms of the instructions you get, we're the third line of defence. We're not the main line of defence, which is the programme itself.
There's another question for you. Let me get.
Yeah.
Yeah, so quite in line with the previous one. So is the test plan is going to cater for each of those phases, and you will give us a specific entry exit criteria for each of those from each participant, what you're expecting? Or it will be more generic?
That's a Kate question from
Okay. Okay.
So
as a programme, not the IPA, we will be setting specific criteria for exit from pit and things like that. So yeah.
So the assurance will be based on what's been. So the overall assurance will be based on what has been written, what has been detailed by the MHHS.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as Colin says, you know, before we publish that, you know, saying in order to exit pit, you need to do this, this, and this, Colin will and his team will look at it, and if they think we're missing a trick, or if they think we, you know, anything's not quite right, then they will feedback and make sure that what we send out to you is good.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just on that, I mean, Kate will set the bar. Kate will judge whether you've gone over the bar. But we'll have a look to make sure the Kate's setting the bar at the right height and that she isn't sort of letting you go when you get over. So that's sort of okay, we'll let you off, leave the bar lying on the ground. So we'll see. We'll look at the overall process, but in terms of how you pass the milestone, we won't be ticking that box. We'll be programming ticking the box. But we'll see that they're applying the rules fairly, and that the rules they're applying are appropriate.
Colin, there's no more questions for you. Is there anything else from the floor? You've been so comprehensive. No questions at all. In which case, it's probably time to thank all of you for today. Thank you for your participation, the engagement, and the questions. It's been really, really helpful. I am conscious we haven't answered all of them, and I'm not trying to ignore it. We will respond to you, just because the topics weren't quite aligned in certain areas. But that brings me to the next agenda on our, next item on the agenda. We've got stalls. We've got stalls for 2 hours until 5 o'clock, actually just under 2 hours. We've got all the topics that you're probably interested in, testing, planning. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Anything you are interested in should be there. If you find something that is absolutely critical for you and you haven't seen it there, do reach out.